Hello? This is urgent, madam. Who is this? I need you to listen carefully. This is the sheriff's office. I told you everything. They said they'd protect my information. Mrs. Davis, are you certain you didn't give out any account details? I needed this for us.
No,
You wanted it for yourself.
I wanted to provide stability.
And you lost everything. I can't believe it. This can't be real.
2 weeks after my son called me selfish for refusing to lend him $180,000, his accountant called me at 9:13 on a Tuesday morning. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said quietly, "I need to speak with you before Matthew asks you to sign anything." My hand tightened around the phone. Matthew had told me the money was for payroll materials and a chance to expand his struggling renovation company. He had sworn I would have every dollar back within 18 months. And when I asked to see his financial records before handing over nearly a third of my retirement savings, my own son looked me in the eyes and said, "You care more about your money than your family." I thought that was the worst thing I was going to hear. I was wrong. Before I tell you what his accountant showed me, if you've ever had to say no to someone you love, tell me in the comments whether you think protecting yourself can ever truly be selfish. And if you're comfortable, share where you're watching from and what time it is there. Please like and subscribe if stories about family, difficult choices, and second chances mean something to you. The money my husband and I built slowly. Before, Matthew asked me for $180,000. I had never thought of myself as a woman with money. I know that sounds strange when I eventually had more than $600,000 spread across retirement accounts, savings certificates of deposit, and conservative investments. But Robert and I never thought of those numbers as wealth. We thought of them as years. Years of getting up when the alarm rang. Years of packing lunches instead of buying them. Years of saying, maybe next summer. Years of choosing security over appearances. My name is Caroline Jenkins, and I was 68 years old when my son decided that protecting those years made me selfish. I had lived in Charlotte, North Carolina for most of my adult life. For 32 years, I worked in payroll administration for a manufacturing company. It wasn't exciting work, but I liked numbers. Numbers didn't flatter you. They didn't become offended when you asked questions. They didn't tell you everything would somehow work out. A paycheck balanced or it didn't. A debt existed whether you wanted to acknowledge it or not. And money already promised somewhere else wasn't available simply because somebody desperately needed it. Robert understood that. When we married, I was 25 and he was 27. He worked as an electrician for a commercial contractor, and we rented a small apartment where the air conditioner rattled every summer, and the kitchen was so narrow we couldn't open the refrigerator door if someone was standing at the stove. We didn't care. We were building something. Our first dining table came from Robert's aunt. One leg was shorter than the others, so Robert folded a piece of cardboard underneath it. We kept that table for 9 years. When Matthew was born, we had less than $2,000 in savings. Robert held him in the hospital and whispered, "Guess we'd better get serious now." And we did. Robert started accepting electrical jobs on Saturdays. I returned to work after maternity leave. Every raise went partly toward retirement. Every tax refund went partly toward the mortgage. When friends bought newer cars, we kept ours. When Robert received a large commercial bonus one year, we replaced the roof instead of taking the cruise I secretly wanted. I complained for approximately 3 days. Robert promised me we'd take that cruise someday. We never did. That memory used to make me sad after he died. Eventually, it made me grateful. Because Robert hadn't been denying us life. He had been protecting the life one of us might someday have to live alone. His weekend electrical jobs gradually became something bigger. A contractor recommended him to another contractor. Then a property manager began calling him regularly. By the time Matthew entered middle school, Robert had enough clients to open his own small electrical contracting company. He never became rich, but he became respected. He paid employees on time. He refused jobs he couldn't properly staff. And he hated debt. "Borrowing isn't free money," he used to tell Matthew. "It's tomorrow's money spent today." Matthew would roll his eyes. I would laugh. Those conversations felt ordinary then. Now I sometimes wonder whether the most important warnings in our lives sound ordinary because we don't yet know we'll need them. Robert and I were married 41 years. Cancer ended the 42nd before we could reach it. He was 70. The last months were difficult, but Robert remained Robert almost until the end. He still asked whether I'd paid the property taxes. He still worried about the gutters. He still wanted to know if I had checked the oil in my car. 3 weeks before he died, he made me promise I knew where every important financial document was. I became irritated. Robert, I'm not helpless. I know. Then stop treating me like I can't manage. He smiled. I'm treating you like I won't be here to answer questions. I left the room because I didn't want him to see me cry. After his funeral, the house became unbearably quiet. People filled my refrigerator with food. Flowers covered the dining room. Sympathy cards lined the mantel. Then everyone went home. That was when grief became real. Not at the funeral. Not when the minister spoke. It became real the first morning I reached across the bed and touched an empty sheet. For months, I couldn't move Robert's coffee mug. His work jacket remained hanging near the garage door. Sometimes I would walk past it and for half a second expect him to come home. Eventually, I learned how to live alone. Not gracefully, just gradually. Financially, Robert had made sure I was secure. Between my retirement account, savings, CDs, and conservative investments, I had approximately $640,000. Our house was mortgage-free. I received Social Security and a modest pension. To Matthew, perhaps that looked like abundance. To me, it looked like responsibility. At 68, I didn't know how long I needed that money to last. 10 years, 2030. What if I needed long-term care? What if the roof needed replacing? What if medical expenses changed? What if I became one of those stubborn 97-year-old women who still drove herself to the grocery store and complained that tomatoes cost too much? I hoped I would. Matthew was my only child, and I loved him enough that saying no to him had never come naturally. Robert and I paid whatever scholarships didn't cover when he went to college. When he moved into his first apartment, we covered the deposit. We helped with his wedding to Lauren. When their first daughter was born, I slept on their sofa for 9 nights, so the exhausted new parents could get a few uninterrupted hours. And when Matthew decided to launch Jenkins residential renovations, Robert and I gave him $35,000. Gave, not lent. Robert told him, "This is your beginning. What happens after this belongs to you." For several years, Matthew seemed to honor that. He was talented. He could walk through an outdated house and immediately imagine what it could become. He understood clients. He knew how to talk to subcontractors. He was ambitious in ways Robert never had been. Soon he was renovating kitchens, bathrooms, older homes, and eventually larger properties. Whenever I asked how business was going, he gave me the same answer: busy, mom. And I accepted it. Maybe because mothers sometimes hear the answer that allows them to sleep. About 6 months before the loan request, however, his questions changed. One afternoon, he was helping me carry groceries inside when he casually asked, "You never refinanced this place after Dad died, right? No. So there's no mortgage, no?" He nodded. A few minutes later, he asked, "Did Dad ever put the house in a trust?" I laughed. "What are you doing planning my funeral?" "Come on, Mom." He smiled. "I'm just making sure your paperwork is organized." It sounded responsible. A month later, he asked whether I had kept most of Robert's life insurance money. There wasn't some enormous insurance fortune, I told him. I know. I was just curious. Then came another question. "So what do you have altogether?" I looked at him. "Enough." He smiled and changed the subject. But that night, lying in bed, I remembered something Robert had said years earlier. Matthew had just left our house after talking excitedly about expanding his company. Robert and I were sitting on the back porch. He watched Matthew's truck disappear. Then he said, "If he ever gets himself into trouble with that business, don't put your retirement into it." I laughed. "That's oddly specific." "I'm serious. He hasn't even asked." "Good. I hope he never does." I looked at my husband. "Why are you worried?" Robert was quiet for several seconds. Then he said, "Matthew believes confidence can fix almost anything. Most of the time, that's one of his strengths. Someday it could become his weakness." I remember telling him he worried too much. Robert reached across the little table between us. Promise me. Promise what? That if something happens to me, you won't gamble your future trying to rescue his business. I squeezed his hand. Fine. Caroline, I promise. At the time, I thought the promise was unnecessary. After Robert died, I occasionally remembered it. But Matthew never asked for anything significant. Until one Thursday afternoon. My phone rang shortly after 4. Hey, Mom, Matthew said brightly. You home tonight? I usually am. Lauren and I want to stop by. My first thought was the grandchildren. Everything okay? Everybody's fine. A slight pause. We just need to talk about something. What kind of something? He laughed. Nothing bad. Actually, it could be really good. They arrived shortly after 7. Lauren brought a bakery box from my favorite pastry shop. Matthew carried a leather folder. I noticed that folder immediately. People don't usually bring spreadsheets when they come bearing good family news. I made coffee. We sat at the same kitchen table where Robert had once taught Matthew fractions and later helped him complete college financial aid forms. For nearly 10 minutes, Matthew talked about everything except why he was there. He asked about my garden, the gutters, my car. Finally, I put down my cup. Matthew, what do you need? His smile faded. He looked at Lauren. Then he opened the folder. Mom, the company has an opportunity. He spread several pages across the table. Photographs, projected revenues, construction schedules. We've picked up several major projects, he explained. Bigger than anything we've handled before. That sounds wonderful. It is. But he didn't look excited. He looked tired. The problem is cash flow, he continued. We have to pay for materials, subcontractors' payroll. Customer payments come later. I felt the first stir of uneasiness. What are you asking? Matthew leaned forward. I need a temporary loan. How much? He looked directly into my eyes. $180,000. For several seconds, the kitchen seemed completely silent. 180,000, only for 18 months. I'll pay interest. I stared at my son. Then I heard Robert's voice as clearly as if he were sitting beside me. Don't put your retirement into it. Matthew kept talking. Contracts, expansion, opportunity, repayment. I barely heard him. Finally, I asked, when would you need this money? He hesitated. Lauren looked down at her coffee. Matthew. He swallowed. Within a few days. That was when something inside me changed. Because businesses planning healthy expansions don't usually discover on Thursday night that they need $180,000 by Monday. Whatever Matthew was describing had already happened. The real question wasn't whether I should help him grow. It was what he was desperately trying to stop from collapsing, and why he hadn't told me. I'm asking my mother to believe in me. Within a few days, I repeated the words slowly, hoping Matthew might correct himself. He didn't. Monday would be ideal. It was Thursday night. I looked at the leather folder spread across my kitchen table, then at Lauren. She had been unusually quiet since they arrived. Her coffee sat untouched in front of her. You need $180,000 by Monday. Matthew leaned back. When you say it that way, it sounds like we're in some kind of crisis. Aren't you? No. The answer came too quickly. He reached for one of the pages. This is what I've been trying to explain. We have several large projects coming in at the same time. That's good news. But construction businesses have to spend money before clients make final payments. He pointed to photographs of 3 beautiful homes. This renovation is almost finished. This one starts next month. And this property is potentially our biggest contract yet. I put on my reading glasses. The page beneath the photographs showed projected revenue. The number was impressive. But after 32 years in payroll administration, impressive numbers had never interested me as much as the small words surrounding them. I tapped one line. What does projected mean here? Matthew frowned. What do you mean? Is this revenue from signed contracts? Most of it. Most we're finalizing a couple, so some of the money you're showing me isn't guaranteed. He sighed. Mom, that's how business works. I understand how projections work. Lauren spoke gently. Caroline, Matthew has been doing this for years. He knows his industry. I know he does. I looked at my son. But if you're asking me to invest $180,000, I need to understand what I'm investing in. Loan, Matthew corrected. What it's a loan, not an investment. 18 months. I'll pay you interest. All right. Then I need to understand what I'm lending against. Matthew gave me a look I remembered from his teenage years. The look that said I was making something unnecessarily complicated. We have signed work coming. Then why aren't you borrowing from a bank that changed the atmosphere? It was subtle but unmistakable. Matthew stopped moving. Lauren looked toward him. I noticed. We've talked to banks, he said. And they're slow. You need the money by Monday. When did you approach them? He rubbed his jaw. A while ago. And what did they say? Mom, banks don't understand small construction companies. They see uneven cash flow and get nervous. Did they reject you? They didn't offer terms that made sense. That wasn't the same answer. What terms did they offer? He pushed back slightly. Do we really need to go through every detail? Yes. His eyebrows lifted. Seriously, you're asking for $180,000. From my mother. Exactly. I took off my glasses. If you were asking me for $1,800, this conversation would be different. I would never ask you for $1,800. You're missing my point. He looked away. I continued. I want to see the company's financial statements. Matthew turned back. What? Profit and loss statements. Balance sheet. Current debt. Accounts payable. Existing loans. His face hardened. You don't need all that. Why wouldn't I? Because you're not a bank. No. A bank has professional underwriting departments. I have my retirement savings. Lauren shifted in her chair. No one expects you to hand Matthew a check tonight. Good. We'd make everything formal, she said. There would be a loan agreement. Matthew nodded. Exactly. You'd earn interest. Probably more than those CDs you're always complaining about. I stared at him. When have I complained to you about my CDs? He blinked. You've mentioned them. Maybe. I couldn't remember. That bothered me more than it should have. How much debt does the company currently have? Matthew's expression tightened. Normal business debt. How much is normal? I don't have every number memorized. You came here prepared to ask me for $180,000. I know my company's finances. Then give me an approximate number. Silence. Lauren looked down. Matthew picked up his coffee, discovered it had gone cold, and put it back down. There's equipment financing. How much? I'd have to check. Credit cards. Yes. How much, Mom? Supplier balances. Obviously. Any overdue? His jaw tightened. I waited. Some invoices are behind. How far? We're catching them up. That wasn't my question. He stood and walked toward the kitchen window. For a moment I saw Robert in the shape of his shoulders. Then Matthew turned around. This is exactly why I didn't want to come here. Why? Because I knew you'd do this. Ask questions. Make me feel like I'm irresponsible. I haven't called you irresponsible. You don't have to. Lauren reached for his hand when he returned to the table. He didn't take it. I asked another question. Have you put your own money into the company? Yes. How much? Everything I reasonably can. Have you borrowed against your house? Lauren's face changed. That was my answer before Matthew spoke. There's a home equity line. My stomach tightened. How much? About $90,000. I stared at him. $90,000. It isn't all used. How much is used? He looked irritated. Most of it. Lauren folded her hands together. I thought about their home. The renovated kitchen. The new SUV in their driveway. The family trip to Florida they had taken 6 months earlier. I had assumed those things meant Matthew's business was thriving. Now I wondered whether I had mistaken spending for success. Does the company have other loans? Yes. How many? Matthew shook his head. This is becoming ridiculous. No, Matthew. This is what lending money looks like. You're my mother, and I'm 68 years old. What does that have to do with anything, everything? My voice rose for the first time. If I lose $180,000, I don't have another 30 years to earn it back. That silenced him. I continued more quietly. Your father and I built that money over decades. It isn't sitting there because I don't know what else to do with it. I know that. Then respect what you're asking. Lauren leaned toward me. Caroline, nobody wants to put you at risk. Then show me the records. Matthew closed his eyes. I don't have time for this. The sentence came out almost under his breath. I heard it anyway. What do you mean? He looked at me. There isn't time to take documents to your advisor, have meetings, analyze everything for 3 weeks. Why not? Because there are payments due. What payments? Business payments. Payroll partly. Materials. Yes. What else? He didn't answer. Matthew, what else? He stood again. Why can't you just trust me? I do trust you. No, you don't. I trust you as my son. That does not mean I blindly hand your company $180,000. He laughed bitterly. Dad would have. The words hit me hard. Don't use your father that way. I'm not using him. Yes, you are. He believed in me. So do I. Then help me. I am trying to understand how. No. You're trying to protect yourself. I stared at him. There was something beneath his anger now. Fear. Real fear. And suddenly, I wasn't thinking about the money. I was thinking about everything he wasn't saying. Matthew, is the company failing? No. Are you sure? Yes. Are employees going unpaid? No. Are taxes unpaid? His face changed so quickly I almost missed it. Almost. What does that have to do with anything? My pulse quickened. It was a question. He gathered several papers into the folder. I'm done. Sit down. No. Matthew. He turned toward me. I'm asking my mother to believe in me. His voice cracked slightly on the word mother. For one dangerous moment I nearly surrendered. This was my boy, the child I had carried, the young man Robert had taught to drive, the father of my grandchildren. Every instinct told me to save him. Then I remembered Robert on our porch. Promise me. I took a slow breath. And I'm asking my son to tell me the truth. Matthew froze. Lauren whispered, Caroline. I looked at both of them. If you give me complete financial statements, I'll review them. I'll take them to my financial advisor. If the company can reasonably repay this loan, I'll consider it. Matthew stared at me. You need an advisor to tell you whether to help your own son. I need facts. I gave you facts. You gave me projections. His expression went cold. So that's your answer. Without the records, I hated what I was about to say. But I said it. No. Lauren stood. Matthew didn't move. For several seconds, he simply stared at me, as if waiting for me to become the mother he wanted. Then he closed the folder. You have more money than you'll ever spend. That isn't for you to decide. No. Apparently nothing is. He headed towards the hallway. Lauren picked up her purse and followed. At the doorway, she turned back. For the first time that evening, I looked closely at her. She wasn't angry. She looked terrified. That expression stayed with me long after they left. Because Matthew had described an opportunity. He had talked about growth. He had shown me beautiful houses and impressive projections. But people standing on the edge of success don't usually look like Lauren had looked when I refused to hand them $180,000. They look disappointed, maybe frustrated. They don't look frightened. I stood alone beside my kitchen table staring at the coffee neither of them had finished. And for the first time, I understood the question I should have been asking all evening. Not what would Matthew do with my money if I gave it to him. What would happen to him if I didn't? The word that hurt more than I expected. Matthew made it almost to the front door before he stopped. Lauren was walking behind him, clutching her purse against her side. When he turned around suddenly, she nearly ran into him. For one hopeful second, I thought he had changed his mind. I thought he would come back to the kitchen table, reopen the leather folder, and finally tell me what was really happening. Instead, he looked at me with an expression I had rarely seen on my son's face. Resentment. So that's it. I remained beside the table. I told you what I need before I can consider the loan. No, Mom. You told me you don't trust me. That isn't what I said. You didn't have to. Lauren touched his arm. Matthew, let's go home. He ignored her. You're sitting in a paid-off house with more money than most people will ever have, and your own son is trying to keep a company alive. There it was again. Keep a company alive. Not expand it. not seize an opportunity, not manage temporary cash flow. Alive. I felt the same uneasiness I had felt when Lauren looked frightened. What did you just say? Matthew frowned. What you said, you're trying to keep the company alive. I meant keep it growing. No, you didn't. He rolled his eyes. Mom, stop analyzing every word I say. Then stop giving me different versions of the same situation. Something broke in him. You have no idea what it's like. His voice echoed through the hallway. I stared at him. Matthew had been angry with me many times over the years. At 16, when I wouldn't let him take my car after midnight. At 19, when Robert and I refused to pay a speeding ticket he'd earned driving back from college. At 30, when I told him starting a business didn't mean he should immediately buy a truck he couldn't afford. Families argue. Children grow up without entirely losing their ability to sound 16 around their mothers. But this was different. There was desperation beneath his anger. I have employees depending on me, he said. People with families. Subcontractors expecting checks. Customers expecting jobs completed. Every morning I wake up with 10 people wanting something from me. I understand you're under pressure. No, you don't. He pointed toward the kitchen. You get your pension. Your Social Security shows up. Your house is paid for. You sit here worrying about whether your CDs are earning enough interest while I'm trying to protect everything I've built. The words were cruel because they erased 40 years. They turned my security into something I had simply received. I folded my arms. Do you think this house paid itself off? I didn't say that. Do you think those retirement accounts appeared after your father died? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? He looked away. I continued. Your father worked 6 days a week for years. I worked for 32 years. We saved when there were things we wanted. We drove cars until repairing them cost more than replacing them. We postponed vacations. We paid your college expenses. I know. We gave you $35,000 to start your company. I know. Then don't stand in my house and talk as though my security is something I happen to find lying on the kitchen counter. Lauren stepped forward. Caroline, nobody is saying that. Matthew just did. He shook his head. This isn't about Dad. You're the one who said your father would have given you the money, because he understood what supporting family means. So do I. Do you? That question hurt more than I wanted him to know. I stared at my son. He saw it. For a moment his face softened. He could have stopped there. Instead, fear and pride pushed him forward. Because from where I'm standing, your son is telling you he's in trouble, and your first response is to demand paperwork. Your first version was that you had an opportunity. Matthew's jaw tightened. Same difference. No, it isn't. Fine. Things are tight. How tight? Forget it. No. You wanted me involved. Now I'm asking. He threw his hands up. That's exactly the problem. Everything has to be on your terms. My money should be on my terms. The second I said it, I knew he would hear only the word money. His face hardened. You know what your problem is, Mom, Lauren whispered Matthew. I didn't answer. He did. You're selfish. One word. Nothing more. But sometimes one word can carry the weight of an entire relationship. Selfish. I was 68 years old, and suddenly I remembered being 27, walking the floor with a feverish toddler against my chest, because Matthew screamed whenever I put him down. I remembered sewing a Halloween costume at midnight because he had changed his mind 2 days before the school party. I remembered sitting through freezing soccer games. I remembered driving 3 hours after midnight when his car broke down during college. I remembered the first serious girlfriend who broke his heart. Matthew was 23 and embarrassed to cry in front of his father, so he sat with me at the same kitchen table until nearly 2 in the morning. I remembered his wedding, the deposit on his first apartment, the $35,000. 9 nights sleeping on his sofa after our granddaughter was born because he and Lauren were so exhausted they could barely think. I had never kept a ledger of motherhood, until my son reduced all of it to one refusal. Selfish, I repeated quietly. His anger flickered. Maybe he finally heard himself, but he didn't apologize. Instead, he said, if Dad were sitting here, he'd be ashamed. That one nearly broke me. Don't. My voice was barely audible. Matthew seemed startled. "Don't bring your father into this again. I'm just telling you no." I stepped toward him. "You do not get to use a dead man who cannot answer you as a weapon against me." The room went silent. Lauren lowered her eyes. Matthew's face reddened. "Fine." He picked up the leather folder. "Forget I asked. I won't forget. I mean, forget the money. I'll figure it out myself. I hope you do." He turned toward the door, then stopped again. "And don't expect me to keep pretending everything between us is fine." I felt something cold settle in my chest. What does that mean? It means maybe I need some distance. Because I won't give you $180,000. Because I know where I stand now. No, Matthew. You know where my money stands. His expression hardened. Same thing, apparently. He opened the door. Lauren followed him outside. Before she stepped onto the porch, she looked back at me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I couldn't tell whether she was apologizing for Matthew or for something else. Then they left. I closed the door. Their headlights moved across my living room wall and disappeared. Only then did I cry. The next morning I woke before 6. For a few seconds I forgot what had happened. Then one word returned: selfish. It followed me everywhere. At the grocery store, while folding laundry, while watering the hydrangeas Robert had planted. Whenever I passed the refrigerator and saw a photograph of Matthew with Lauren and the children. By Sunday evening, guilt had become exhausting. I sat at my desk and opened my financial accounts. There were ways to access $180,000. Not painless ways. I would have to liquidate investments. There could be tax consequences. I would lose interest income. But it was possible. I stared at the screen. Maybe I had been too rigid. Maybe Robert's warning belonged to another time. Maybe mothers weren't supposed to calculate risk when their children were frightened. My hand moved toward my phone. Before calling Matthew, I called my younger sister Diane. She answered on the second ring. "Everything okay?" I started crying before I could answer, so I told her. When I finished, Diane was silent. Then she asked, "Did Matthew show you his financial statements?" "No." "Did he explain exactly why he needs the money?" "He said payroll materials cash flow." "That isn't what I asked." I stared at the glowing computer screen. "No." "Then don't make a $180,000 decision because you're afraid your son is angry." He called me selfish. "I've known you 64 years, Caroline. You're many things. You alphabetize your spices. You send birthday cards 3 weeks early. You're occasionally impossible." Despite myself, I laughed. But selfish isn't one of them. After we hung up, I closed the banking page. The next morning, my cousin Nancy called. We talked about ordinary things for several minutes. Then she said I heard Matthew's having business trouble. My stomach tightened. "Who told you?" "He talked to Stephen, her husband." "What did Matthew say?" Nancy hesitated. "He said he asked you for help, and that you refused." "Did he tell Stephen he asked for $180,000? "No." "Did he say I asked for his financial records?" "Num." Nancy became quiet. Then she added, "He said you have plenty of money but wouldn't help save the family business." Save. Again. Not expand. Save. Within 3 days, 2 other relatives made awkward comments. Nobody openly accused me. That would have been easier. Instead, I heard gentle remarks about supporting children through difficult seasons. One person said, "Sometimes a young business just needs somebody to believe in it." I stopped explaining myself. Matthew had created a simple story. Successful son needed help. Comfortable widowed mother refused. No one knew about the missing financial statements. No one knew about the $90,000 home equity line. No one knew Matthew had given me different explanations. And apparently no one knew what was truly happening inside his company. Neither did I. By the end of the second week, something inside me had changed. I still loved my son. I still worried about him. But I was no longer willing to purchase peace with him. If Matthew wanted to speak to me, he knew my number. Tuesday morning, I was washing a coffee cup when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Normally, I would have ignored it. Instead, for reasons I still can't explain, I answered. "Hello, Mrs. Jenkins." "Yes. My name is Daniel Price." The name meant nothing to me. Then he added, I'm the accountant for Jenkins Residential Renovations. I stopped breathing for a second. Matthew's accountant. Yes. I dried my hand on a dish towel. Is something wrong? A pause. Then Daniel spoke carefully. Mrs. Jenkins, I apologize for contacting you unexpectedly, but I believe we need to speak privately. My fingers tightened around the phone. About what? About the financing Matthew discussed with you. My heart began beating faster. How do you know about that? Another pause. Then Daniel said the sentence that turned my guilt into fear. I need to speak with you before your son asks you to sign anything. The call 2 weeks later. For several seconds I said nothing. I stood beside my kitchen sink with a damp dish towel in one hand and my phone pressed against my ear. Outside, a delivery truck rolled slowly past my house. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Everything around me remained perfectly ordinary. But Daniel Price had just said something that made the room feel different. I need to speak with you before your son asks you to sign anything. I put the towel down. Sign what? There was a pause. I'd rather discuss that with you in person. No. My answer came sharper than I intended. You called me Mr. Price. You told me my son may ask me to sign something. You don't get to say that and then leave me wondering. I understand. Then tell me what you're talking about. Daniel sighed quietly. Mrs. Jenkins, Matthew is my client. There are confidentiality obligations I have to respect. Then why are you calling me at all? Because your proposed participation has become part of financial materials I've been asked to prepare. I gripped the back of a kitchen chair. My proposed participation. Yes, I haven't proposed anything. Silence. Not long. Maybe 2 seconds. But long enough. Mr. Price, I understand that now. Those 5 words frightened me more than anything else he had said. I pulled out the chair and sat down. What exactly did Matthew tell you? I need to be careful about characterizing private conversations. Did he tell you I agreed to lend him $180,000? No. Not explicitly. Did he tell you I refused? Daniel didn't answer immediately. No. I stared across my kitchen. The leather folder was gone, but I could still picture it on the table. The projections, the photographs, the promises. What did he tell you? That family financing remained available as part of the company's restructuring options. Restructuring. The word came out before I could stop it. Matthew had never used that word. He had said expansion, growth, opportunity, working capital. Did you say restructuring? Another pause. Yes. What exactly is being restructured? I can't discuss the company's complete financial position over the phone. You're making it sound like his business is in serious trouble. I think you should speak with me before drawing conclusions. Is the company failing? I didn't say that. Are employees being paid? Mrs. Jenkins, does he owe taxes? I can't answer questions about confidential company accounts. My frustration rose. You called me to warn me, but you won't tell me what you're warning me about. I didn't call to frighten you. Well, you're doing an excellent job. Daniel was quiet. Then his tone softened. What I can tell you is this. If you're considering providing funds to Jenkins Residential Renovations, you should understand precisely what those funds are intended to address before you make any commitment. There was that word. Address. Not expand. Not build. Address. 32 years in payroll had taught me that uncomfortable facts were often hidden inside polite vocabulary. A temporary payroll adjustment usually meant someone wasn't getting paid what they expected. A budget correction meant somebody had overspent. And a restructuring rarely happened because everything was going beautifully. Matthew told me the $180,000 was for materials payroll and several large new projects. Daniel didn't respond. His silence was enough. That isn't the whole truth, is it? I think we should meet. My heart sank. When, if you're available, I can see you this afternoon. The urgency bothered me almost as much as the secrecy. What time? 2:30, where he gave me the address of his office in South Charlotte. I wrote it on the back of an envelope. Then I asked the question that had been bothering me since he introduced himself. Did Matthew ask you to call me? No. The answer was immediate. I sat straighter. He doesn't know we're speaking. No. Why not? Because I'm not contacting you on his behalf. Until that moment, a small part of me had assumed this was another attempt by Matthew to convince me. Perhaps he thought an accountant could make the loan sound safer. Perhaps Daniel was supposed to reassure me that the company was healthy, but that wasn't what was happening. Are you doing something you're not supposed to be doing? No. Daniel's voice became firm. I'm being careful to remain within my professional obligations. I won't disclose information you're not entitled to receive. Then what am I entitled to receive? Information and documents directly connected to you and the proposed financing involving you. I closed my eyes. Proposed financing involving me. Someone had apparently built a financial plan around money I had never agreed to provide. Should I bring anything? Did Matthew leave you copies of the materials he showed you? No. He took the folder. Did you sign anything? Absolutely not. Did you initial anything? No. Send an email, text him saying you would consider the loan. I told him I would consider it only if he gave me complete financial statements. Daniel became quiet again. That's helpful. Helpful to whom? To understanding the situation. I didn't like that answer either. After we hung up, I sat at the table staring at the envelope where I'd written his address. My first instinct was to call Matthew. I picked up my phone. His name was near the top of my recent contacts. For nearly a minute, my thumb hovered over it. Then I remembered Daniel saying Matthew didn't know about the meeting. If I warned him, I might never learn why his own accountant believed I needed protection from documents Matthew intended to bring me. So I put the phone down. At 1:30, I changed clothes. Navy slacks, a white blouse, small silver earrings Robert had given me on our 20th anniversary. I even put on lipstick. It seems ridiculous now, but fear has always made me want to look composed. Some people wear armor. I wore sensible shoes and carried a handbag containing a notebook, 2 pens, tissues, reading glasses, and absolutely no intention of signing anything. Daniel's office was in a modest 2-story brick building between an insurance agency and a dental practice. Nothing about it looked dramatic. There was no marble lobby, no expensive furniture, just a quiet reception area with gray chairs, a coffee machine, and framed landscape photographs. A receptionist looked up. Mrs. Jenkins. Yes, Mr. Price is expecting you. Those words made my stomach tighten. A few minutes later, a man in his early 50s appeared. Caroline Jenkins, I stood. Daniel Price. We shook hands. He wore a pale blue shirt with the sleeves buttoned neatly at his wrists. His hair was beginning to gray at the temples. He didn't look secretive. He looked tired. He led me down a short hallway into his office and closed the door. A yellow legal pad sat on the desk. Beside it was a thick folder. I recognized Matthew's company name printed across the tab. Jenkins Residential Renovations. Daniel noticed me looking. Before we start, I want to clarify something. All right. Matthew has been my client for approximately 3 years. I handle accounting and financial reporting for his business. I can't simply open his books to anyone, including a family member. I understand. However, Matthew recently asked me to prepare information connected to a potential private loan. From me? Yes. What exactly did he ask you to prepare? A repayment structure, cash flow projections, supporting financial information, and material related to a broader restructuring proposal. There was that word again. Broader. Daniel nodded. The $180,000 wasn't being considered in isolation. I leaned forward. What does that mean? It means your funds were presented as one part of a larger plan for stabilizing the business. Stabilizing. Another word Matthew had never used. I felt heat rising into my face. When Matthew came to my house, he told me he had several major projects and needed temporary working capital. Daniel folded his hands. There are new projects. So that part was true. Yes, I almost relaxed. Then he continued. But those projects are not the primary reason the company currently needs cash. The relief disappeared. What is? Daniel glanced at the folder. Before I answer what I can, I need to ask you something directly. All right. When Matthew discussed borrowing from you, did he tell you the funds would be used to satisfy existing obligations? What kind of obligations? Existing business debt? No. Past due supplier accounts, equipment financing, Number credit balances. Number Daniel stopped. I stared at him. What about taxes? His expression told me I had asked the right question. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened the folder and removed several pages. I can't provide you with unrestricted access to company records. But these figures were incorporated into materials prepared in connection with the financing Matthew expected from you. He turned the first page toward me. Columns of numbers filled it. Accounts payable, credit facilities, equipment obligations, supplier balances, tax liabilities. I adjusted my glasses. At first the numbers blurred together. Then I began reading them individually. One supplier was owed tens of thousands. Another balance was more than 60 days past due. There were business credit cards carrying amounts far higher than I expected. Equipment loans, short-term financing. I looked up. This isn't a cash flow problem. Daniel remained silent. This is debt. Yes. How much? He pointed to a figure. I read it, then read it again. My stomach dropped. Matthew owes all of this. These are company obligations reflected in the restructuring materials. I looked back at the page. How long has this been happening? I can't discuss every historical detail. Did the new projects cause it? Number one simple word. No. Matthew hadn't come to my house because success had arrived too quickly. The problems were already there. What happened? Daniel removed another page. 2 profitable contracts were lost earlier this year. Costs on another project exceeded estimates substantially. There have also been collection delays. And the $180,000, only part of it, would have supported new project expenses. I felt sick. What would the rest do? Address existing liabilities. How much of it enough that describing the entire amount as expansion capital would not give you an accurate picture? I sat back. My son hadn't simply avoided details. He had changed the meaning of the loan. He wanted me to believe I was financing his future. In reality, I would be paying for his past. Does Lauren know? Daniel's expression tightened. I can't answer that. I looked down at the numbers again. Then something occurred to me. If all you wanted was for me to understand that Matthew has debt, you could have told him to show me these documents. Yes. So why call me privately? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached deeper into the folder. Because the debt isn't the main reason I asked you here. My hands went cold. He removed a different document. Unlike the others, this one wasn't filled with accounting columns. It looked like a financing proposal. Daniel placed it between us. What is that? A preliminary restructuring document prepared for discussion with a private lender. What does it have to do with me? Daniel turned it toward me and tapped a paragraph near the bottom. I began reading. Then I saw 2 words that made everything else on the page disappear. Family real estate. I looked up slowly. Daniel's face was grim. Mrs. Jenkins, he said, before we go any further, I need to ask you one more question. I could barely hear my own voice. What did you ever tell Matthew? That your house could be used to support his business financing? The numbers Matthew never showed me. For a few seconds I couldn't take my eyes off the words on the page. Family real estate. Daniel had just asked whether I had ever told Matthew that my house could be used to support his business financing. No. My answer came so quickly that Daniel stopped reaching for the next document. No, I repeated. Absolutely not. He studied my face. Not verbally, no. In an email, number a text message, no. Did you ever tell him you would consider using your property as security? If the $180,000 wasn't enough, I felt my pulse beating in my throat. I didn't even agree to the $180,000. Daniel nodded slowly. That matches what you've told me. What exactly has Matthew done? I want to be precise. Please do. Daniel pulled the financing proposal slightly closer to himself. This document does not transfer your property. It doesn't create a lien against your house. Matthew cannot pledge property he doesn't own simply by mentioning it in a proposal. I exhaled. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath. So my house is safe. As far as the documents I've reviewed, nothing has been legally transferred or encumbered. Relief came first, then anger replaced it. Then why is my property mentioned at all? Daniel looked at me. That's something we need to discuss. But before we get there, I think you need to understand the company's actual financial position. Otherwise, the reference to your property won't make sense. I didn't like that answer, but I nodded. Daniel turned back to the pages filled with numbers. This is a summary prepared from the company's current obligations. He pointed to the first section, Accounts Payable. I adjusted my glasses. There were several suppliers listed: lumber, cabinetry, plumbing materials, tile, electrical components. Some balances were current, others weren't. One invoice was more than 60 days overdue, another was approaching 90. Matthew told me he needed money to buy materials for new jobs. He does need materials. So that wasn't a lie. Daniel considered the question. I wouldn't characterize every statement he made as false. The company has new work. It needs working capital. But those facts don't explain the whole situation. He pointed to another section. These are existing supplier balances. I followed the numbers down the page. The total made my stomach tighten. If suppliers aren't being paid, why are they still giving him materials? Some have reduced his credit terms. One requires partial payment before releasing additional orders. That explained the urgency. So part of my money would go to old invoices. Yes. How much? The proposed allocation wasn't final, but a significant portion. I looked at him. What else? Daniel turned the page. Business credit cards. There were several. I had expected perhaps $20,000 or $30,000. The total was much higher. How did this happen? Operating expenses accumulated during periods when customer payments were delayed. All of it. Daniel hesitated. Not entirely. That caught my attention. What does that mean? Because I can't go through individual transactions unless they're directly relevant to your financing decision. So there are things on those cards that shouldn't be there. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Daniel sighed. Matthew has occasionally allowed personal and business spending to overlap more than I would recommend. I closed my eyes briefly. Robert would have hated that. He had kept separate checking accounts for his company from the first day he opened it. Once, when Matthew was 16, Robert accidentally used the business card to buy groceries. He drove back to the store the next morning, returned everything on that card, and bought it again using his personal account. I had laughed at him. Robert, nobody cares. I care. That was how he lived. Clean lines, clear boundaries. Apparently Matthew had not inherited that part. Daniel moved to the next category. Equipment financing, trucks, trailers, specialized tools. The monthly obligations alone surprised me. Why does a renovation company need this much equipment debt? Matthew expanded quickly. How quickly? Over roughly 18 months. I thought about the photographs Matthew had shown me. Larger houses, bigger projects, more employees. I had interpreted growth as success. Maybe Matthew had too. Was the expansion profitable? Some projects were. That wasn't my question. Daniel looked at me almost apologetically. Not enough to support the cost structure he built around the expected growth. There it was, the simplest explanation so far. Matthew had built a larger company before he had built enough profit to support it. What happened to the big contracts? 2 profitable contracts were lost earlier this year. Why? One client postponed a major renovation. Another project went to a competing contractor. And Matthew had already hired people, yes. Bought equipment, yes. Taken on debt, yes. I sat back. The picture was becoming painfully clear. Matthew had expected future revenue. He had spent as though it had already arrived. Then it hadn't. I thought about something Robert used to tell him. Don't spend Friday's paycheck on Monday. Matthew had simply done it on a much larger scale. Daniel pointed to another line. This project also exceeded its estimate. How badly, he told me. I winced. Did the client refuse to pay? Part of the overage was contractual risk Matthew's company had accepted, so he absorbed it. Yes. And then there were collection delays. Yes. How much money is customers owing him? Daniel gave me a figure. It was substantial. For a moment I understood Matthew's frustration. On paper, money was coming. In reality, bills were due now. That was exactly how a company could appear busy while suffocating. I felt something complicated inside me. Anger, but also pity. Matthew hadn't invented every problem. Some of what happened was simply business. Contracts disappeared. Customers paid late. Estimates went wrong. But then I remembered my kitchen table, the photographs, the word opportunity. Why didn't he just tell me this? Daniel didn't answer. He could have come to me and said, "Mom, I expanded too fast. I lost contracts. I owe suppliers. I need help restructuring." Yes. I still might have said no. Yes. But at least it would have been the truth. Daniel folded his hands. I can't speak for Matthew's motives. I can. My voice sounded harder than I expected. He thought I'd be more likely to finance success than failure. Daniel said nothing. I looked at the next line. Tax obligations. My stomach tightened again. How serious there are payroll-related tax obligations and other amounts that need to be addressed. I stared at him. Payroll taxes. Daniel nodded. That frightened me more than the credit cards. I had spent my career in payroll. I knew that money withheld from employees wasn't simply another bill you postponed because cash was tight. Does Matthew understand how serious that is? I've made my concerns clear. How far behind Daniel gave me only the information tied to the restructuring plan. It was enough. I took off my glasses and rubbed the bridge of my nose. So tell me if I understand this correctly. All right. My son came to my house and told me he needed $180,000 because he had so much new business that he needed cash for materials and payroll. Yes. But in reality, he has overdue suppliers, business, credit card debt, equipment, financing tax obligations, 2 lost contracts, and at least 1 badly performing project. Yes. And my money would be used partly for current operations and partly to pay old obligations. Yes. I stared at him. Then this isn't an expansion loan. No. What is it? Daniel considered his words. A stabilization loan would be more accurate. I almost laughed. Stabilization. Another polite word. You mean rescue. Daniel didn't answer. I didn't need him to. I looked again at the total obligations. The number was large enough that $180,000 wouldn't magically solve everything. That realization frightened me. If I gave him the money, would the company survive? Daniel leaned back. No accountant can guarantee that. I'm not asking for a guarantee. He thought for a moment. The funds would relieve immediate pressure. They could allow Matthew time to complete profitable projects, negotiate with creditors, and improve cash flow. But without operational changes, additional money could postpone the problem rather than solve it. There it was. The sentence I had needed. If I handed Matthew $180,000 without forcing reality into the room, I might not be saving him. I might simply be purchasing him more time to avoid changing. I looked at Daniel. Is that why you called me? Partly. Partly. He glanced toward the financing proposal again. The debt itself concerned me. But businesses get into debt. Owners restructure. They negotiate. They downsize. Sometimes they recover. So what concerned you more? Daniel pulled the proposal toward us. He pointed again to the paragraph I had barely read earlier. It described potential additional support if initial financing proved insufficient. My eyes moved slowly across the language. Family-backed capital, supplemental security, real estate collateral. I looked up. My house. Potentially. No. I pushed the document away, as though touching it might somehow make it real. My son does not own my house. I know. He isn't on the deed. I understand. I never offered it. That's why we're having this conversation. My hands began trembling. I placed them flat on my lap. Did Matthew tell someone he could use my house? Daniel chose his words carefully. He indicated that additional family security might become available if necessary. Might become available. Yes. How that was never established. Then why put it in writing? Because the private lender wanted to understand what additional support could exist if the first stage of financing wasn't enough. I stared at him. First stage. The $180,000 was the first stage. Suddenly, several conversations from the previous months returned to me. Is there still a mortgage? Did Dad put the house into a trust? What do you have altogether? Questions I had mistaken for concern. My mouth went dry. Daniel. Yes. Was Matthew expecting the $180,000 to be enough? Daniel didn't answer immediately. That hesitation told me everything. Tell me. The restructuring materials considered the possibility that it might not be. I felt physically cold, so he could have come back. Yes, for more money. Possibly. And if I didn't have enough cash, my eyes moved back to the paragraph. Family real estate. Daniel remained silent. I thought about my home. The bedroom where Robert died. The kitchen where Matthew had done his homework. The porch where my husband made me promise never to risk my retirement rescuing our son's business. Matthew hadn't merely looked at my savings and seen a solution. He had looked beyond them. At the house. At everything Robert and I had spent a lifetime protecting. I swallowed. Is there anything else? Daniel's expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough to make my stomach tighten again. He reached for another page inside the folder. Yes. I almost didn't want him to continue. But I had come too far to protect myself with ignorance. Daniel placed the document in front of me. This is the part I believe you need to understand before Matthew brings you any loan agreement. I looked down. Near the bottom was a reference to my property followed by an estimated market value. $520,000. My heart stopped. I had never told Matthew what my house was worth. I looked at Daniel. Where did he get that number? Daniel's answer was quiet. I think that's a question you need to ask your son. And suddenly I understood that Matthew hadn't merely thought about my house. Someone had already taken the time to calculate what it could be worth to him. My house was already in the plan. I stared at the number until it stopped looking like money. $520,000. That was the estimated value printed beside a description of my home. Not Matthew's home. Mine. The house Robert and I had bought when Matthew was 8 years old. The house where we had measured his height against the laundry room doorframe until he was 17 and announced he was too old for it. The house where Robert and I had celebrated 30 anniversaries. The house where I had held my husband's hand during the final months of his life. Someone had reduced all of that to collateral value. Where did this come from? Daniel didn't pretend to misunderstand. The valuation. Yes. It appears to be based on publicly available property information and comparable sales. Who requested it? Daniel paused. Matthew provided the property address as part of discussions about possible family-backed support. I felt heat rise into my face. He gave someone my address. Your address is public information, Mrs. Jenkins. That isn't what I asked. Daniel nodded. No, it isn't. Did he give it to the lender? The property was identified in preliminary discussions. I pushed the document away. You keep saying preliminary, because that's important. Why? Because I don't want you leaving here believing your son has secretly mortgaged your house. He hasn't. I looked directly at him. Could he not without legal authority he doesn't currently have? He's not on the deed. Correct. There is no mortgage. According to the information used in the proposal, yes. That sentence stopped me. According to the information, Daniel realized immediately what he had revealed. I leaned forward. How did they know there was no mortgage? I was silent. I already knew. Matthew. 6 months earlier, standing in my kitchen with grocery bags. You never refinanced this place after Dad died, right? So there's no mortgage. I had answered casually because he was my son. I had thought he was checking whether his widowed mother had her finances organized. Now I understood he had been gathering information. Matthew told them. Daniel remained careful. The materials reflect the property as mortgage-free. He told them. I can't characterize every conversation. Fine. I sat back. I can. For several seconds, the only sound in Daniel's office was the faint hum of the air conditioner. Then I asked, what does additional family security actually mean? Daniel folded his hands. In the restructuring scenario, the $180,000 private loan would provide immediate liquidity. My money. Yes. And if that wasn't enough, the company would need other options. What options? Asset sales, negotiated payment plans, additional financing, possibly additional equity from Matthew, and my house. Daniel hesitated. The proposal noted that family-owned real estate might potentially support additional financing if the owner agreed. If the owner agreed. 4 words separating a bad idea from a catastrophe. So I would have had to sign. Yes. Matthew couldn't do anything without me. Correct. I exhaled slowly. That mattered. I needed to know that. Matthew had not forged my signature. He had not transferred my property. He had not committed a crime against me. But somehow that didn't make me feel much better. Because before asking my permission, he had already allowed my home to become part of a plan. How would this have happened? Daniel pulled a blank sheet of paper toward himself. Hypothetically, yes. You provide the initial $180,000. I nodded. The company uses those funds to address urgent obligations and continue operations. And if things improve, then ideally, the business stabilizes, completes profitable projects, and repays you according to the loan agreement. And if things don't improve, then Matthew would need additional liquidity, which is where the house comes in. Potentially, how, depending on the structure, you might be asked to guarantee additional borrowing, take out financing secured by your property, or provide collateral support. I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, because the idea was so outrageous that my mind rejected it. You're telling me I could have gone from lending my son $180,000 to risking my home, if you voluntarily agreed to additional arrangements. But Matthew was already discussing that possibility. Yes, I looked down at my hands. My wedding ring was still there. I had never taken it off after Robert died. Suddenly I could hear him. Don't put your retirement into it. At the time I had interpreted his warning narrowly. Retirement accounts, savings, investments. But Robert had meant something larger. Don't gamble your future. My house was part of that future. I looked at Daniel. Why didn't Matthew tell me any of this? I can't answer for him. Try. Daniel shook his head. I shouldn't speculate. I almost smiled. You're very good at being an accountant. I've been told that isn't always a compliment. For the first time that afternoon, a tiny piece of tension left the room. Then I asked, do you think Matthew intended to trick me? Daniel became serious again. I think Matthew is under significant pressure. That isn't an answer. No. He paused. From what I've observed, he believes the company can recover if he can buy enough time. That sounds like Matthew. He is very confident in future projects. That also sounds like Matthew. And when someone becomes convinced that recovery is just one contract or one payment away, they can begin treating temporary solutions as reasonable. I understood. Matthew didn't necessarily see himself as taking advantage of me. He probably saw himself as protecting everyone from a disaster that he believed he could still prevent. That realization softened something in me, but only slightly. Good intentions didn't turn my house into his property. Did he tell you I would agree? Daniel considered the wording. He expressed confidence that family support would be available. I gave a humorless laugh. That's a very polite way of saying yes. He did not present a signed commitment, but he planned as though I would say yes. Daniel didn't disagree. I stood and walked toward the window. Cars moved along the street below. People were leaving restaurants carrying shopping bags, living ordinary afternoons. I thought about Matthew telling me I had more money than I could ever spend. At the time, I had heard anger. Now I heard assumption. He had looked at my savings and thought available. He had looked at my house and thought available later. That hurt differently. It wasn't simply that my son wanted money. He had begun treating my security as an extension of his own. I returned to the chair. I want to make sure I understand something. All right. The lender knew Matthew didn't own my property. Yes. They knew he couldn't pledge it, yes. So nobody was pretending otherwise. Correct. And nothing has been signed. Correct. Then what exactly were they expecting? Daniel pointed to a section farther down the proposal. If the initial financing wasn't sufficient, they anticipated that Matthew might approach you about additional support. I read the language carefully. Potential supplemental collateral subject to owner approval. Legally, it was cautious. Emotionally, it felt like someone had already planned the next conversation I hadn't agreed to have. First, he asks for $180,000. Yes. Then if that doesn't fix things, he comes back. Possibly. And asks me to put my house behind another loan. That was one scenario. I shook my head. My son never mentioned a second scenario. Daniel didn't respond. I suddenly remembered another conversation. 3 months earlier, Matthew had been replacing a loose railing on my back steps. We were talking about estate planning because a neighbor had died unexpectedly. Matthew asked, "You still have the house in your name personally, right?" I had said yes. Then he asked, "You never moved it into some irrevocable trust or anything?" I laughed. "Why would you care?" He smiled. "Just making sure things won't be complicated someday." Someday. I had assumed he meant after I died. Now I wasn't sure. My stomach turned. Daniel is my name anywhere else in these materials? Your name, yes. He checked several pages. Not as a borrower. Guarantor number investor number. Then how am I described? He showed me. Family source. 2 impersonal words. I stared at them. Not Caroline. Not Matthew's mother. Family source. I closed the folder. I've seen enough. Daniel nodded. But I didn't stand. There was one thing I still needed to know. If I had given him the $180,000 without asking questions, would you have stopped me? Daniel thought carefully. I would have strongly recommended that you review the purpose, risks, repayment structure, and financial condition of the company before providing funds. That's accountant language. Yes. Give me human language. For the first time, Daniel smiled sadly. I would have told my own mother not to write the check until she understood everything you're seeing today. That answer stayed with me. I gathered my handbag. At the door, Daniel said, "Mrs. Jenkins," I turned. "Matthew isn't a bad man." I didn't answer. He's made serious financial decisions. He's also frightened. I know. Fear can make people convince themselves that what they're doing is temporary. I looked back at the folder. And temporary decisions can cost someone else their home. Yes. I left his office shortly after 4. I didn't call Matthew. I didn't call Lauren. I drove home in silence. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't immediately get out of the car. I looked at the brick house in front of me. Robert had replaced those shutters himself. The maple near the sidewalk had been barely taller than Matthew when we planted it. The porch light, Robert installed 27 years ago, was still there. My son had looked at this house and seen $520,000. I looked at it and saw my life. Inside, I made tea I didn't drink. Then I went upstairs to the closet in my bedroom. On the top shelf behind 2 blankets sat a gray fireproof document box. Robert's box. I hadn't opened it in almost 2 years. Inside were old insurance papers, deeds, tax documents, business records, and envelopes in Robert's handwriting. I carried it downstairs and placed it on the kitchen table. For several minutes, I simply stared at it. Then I opened the lid. I wasn't searching for anything specific. Maybe I just needed to feel close to the one person who had warned me. Halfway through a stack of old financial papers, I found an envelope. My name was written across the front. Caroline. I recognized Robert's handwriting immediately. My hands began to tremble. I opened it. The first sentence made me stop breathing. "There is something about Matthew's business. I should have told you years ago, what my husband had seen years ago." I read the first sentence 3 times. "There is something about Matthew's business I should have told you years ago." My hands were trembling so badly that I had to place the letter flat on the kitchen table. For a moment I couldn't continue. Robert had been gone 4 years. Whatever was inside that envelope had been written while he was alive, perhaps during a time when he had known something I hadn't. I took a slow breath. Then I began reading. Caroline. If you're reading this, I've probably waited too long to tell you something. I know you hate secrets. I know you would rather hear something difficult than be protected from it. I also know you'll be angry that I kept this from you. I was. I stopped. That was Robert. Even in a letter written years ago, he knew me well enough to predict my reaction. I continued, Matthew came to me for help with his business last year. Not the money we gave him to start it. Something else. My heart began pounding. I sat down. Robert had written that Matthew had accumulated approximately $27,000 in business debt. At the time, Matthew had insisted it was temporary. A delayed customer payment. A supplier issue. A project that had gone over budget. Robert had believed him. Then another bill came, and another. Eventually, Matthew admitted he couldn't cover everything. Robert had paid the debt, not from the company, from his own savings. I stared at the page. $27,000. I remembered that year. I remembered Matthew talking about a difficult project. I remembered Robert telling me it's handled. I had assumed he meant Matthew had solved it. He hadn't. Robert had solved it. I continued reading. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd want to confront him. I didn't want Matthew to feel humiliated. I thought helping him once would teach him something. I hoped it would. My eyes filled with tears. Robert had always protected people from embarrassment, sometimes too much. The letter continued. He promised me it would never happen again. He promised he would separate personal expenses from business expenses. He promised he would stop borrowing to cover mistakes. I believed him. But I told Matthew something I need you to remember if I'm not here someday. Helping him cannot mean making his consequences disappear. I put the letter down. That sentence was underlined. Twice. I closed my eyes. Suddenly I was back on our porch years earlier. Robert had looked across the backyard while Matthew's truck disappeared down the street. If he ever gets himself into trouble with that business, don't put your retirement into it. I had laughed. He hadn't. At the time, I had thought Robert was being overly cautious. Now I realized he had already seen something I hadn't. Matthew had learned that when things went wrong, his father could make the problem disappear. Maybe that had been the first lesson that eventually brought us to my kitchen table. I picked up the letter again. There was more. I don't want you to punish him. I don't want you to disinherit him. I don't want you to become bitter. But I don't want you to confuse rescuing him with loving him. That sentence broke me. I pressed, there was more. I don't want you to punish him. I don't want you to disinherit him. I don't want you to become bitter. But I don't want you to confuse rescuing him with loving him. That sentence broke me. I pressed the letter against my chest and cried. Not because Robert had been right. I would have given anything for him to have been wrong. I cried because he had known that someday I might have to make a decision alone that we had always expected to make together. And he had tried to leave me a compass. I kept reading. Matthew has good qualities. He's ambitious. He's generous when he feels secure. He loves his family. But he has a dangerous habit of believing the next opportunity will fix the last mistake. I looked toward the window. That was Matthew exactly. Always the next contract, the next client, the next opportunity, the next check, the next month, the next big project. The future was always supposed to repair the past. Robert's final paragraph was shorter. If he asks you for money after I'm gone, don't answer from guilt. Answer from wisdom. And if you say no, let him be angry. A child can survive a parent's boundary. What worries me is a parent who destroys her future trying to prevent an adult child from facing his present. I couldn't read anymore. I folded the letter carefully. Then I sat at that kitchen table until the sun went down. For the first time since Daniel's meeting, my anger began to settle. Not disappear. Settle. There was a difference. I no longer saw Matthew simply as a selfish son trying to take his mother's money. I saw a man who was scared. A man who had expanded too quickly. A man who had made mistakes. A man who had already been rescued once. And a man who might have convinced himself that another rescue was simply what families did. But understanding him did not mean surrendering my boundaries. That distinction became important. The next morning I called my estate attorney. Her name was Rebecca Shaw. She had handled Robert's estate after his death and had helped me update my documents afterward. Caroline, she said when she answered, "How are you? I need to review everything." Her tone changed immediately. "Is something wrong?" "Not legally." That isn't the same as nothing being wrong. No. I told her about Matthew's request. I told her about Daniel. I told her about the reference to my house. I did not tell her everything I had learned about Matthew's debts. I didn't need to. Rebecca listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Do you have any documents Matthew asked you to sign?" "No. Has he ever had power of attorney for you?" I thought about it. Years ago, I named him as a backup financial agent. Rebecca was quiet. Was that before or after Robert died after? Then I think we should revisit that. My stomach tightened. Why? Not because your son has done anything legally wrong, but because you're telling me he is under financial pressure and has already discussed your property as a potential source of security. I stared at the letter from Robert. What would you recommend? I'd recommend separating love from authority. Those words sounded familiar. Rebecca continued. You can remain close to Matthew while making sure no one can access your financial affairs simply because you're his mother. What would changing it involve? We can appoint a neutral successor financial agent. Someone whose only responsibility is protecting your interests if you ever become unable to manage things yourself. I hesitated. Would Matthew know? He would know if you tell him. I thought about that. For years I had treated estate planning as something loving families did together, but maybe that wasn't always necessary. Maybe independence was part of responsible aging. I want to do it. Rebecca agreed to prepare the paperwork. After that, I called my financial advisor. I reviewed every account. We discussed which assets were liquid, which were protected for retirement, and what would happen if I needed long-term care. For the first time in years, I saw my finances not as a pile of money, but as a structure. Every account had a purpose. Every investment had a role. My retirement wasn't excess. It was my future. And suddenly Matthew's request looked completely different. He hadn't asked for spare money. He had asked me to remove one of the support beams from my own financial house. That afternoon, Rebecca called. The revised documents are ready. I drove to her office. We reviewed everything carefully. My will remained essentially the same. Matthew remained my son. My grandchildren remained beneficiaries. Nothing about my love for them changed. But my financial power of attorney changed. Matthew would no longer be the person positioned to manage my finances if I became incapacitated. Instead, Rebecca would coordinate with a professional fiduciary. I signed the documents. When I walked out of her office, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not triumph, not revenge. Peace. I had spent 2 weeks wondering whether saying no to Matthew made me a bad mother. Now I understood that saying no had forced me to look at something I had avoided for years. I had spent so much time protecting Matthew from disappointment that I had forgotten he was an adult. Adults are allowed to fail. Adults are allowed to rebuild. Adults are allowed to learn that consequences aren't the same as abandonment. That evening, I placed Robert's letter back inside the fireproof box. Before closing the lid, I read the final line again. Let him be angry. I smiled through my tears. I'm trying, Robert. Then I closed the box. I expected the hardest part to be over. I was wrong. The next morning, Matthew called. His voice sounded completely different. Calmer. Almost gentle. Mom. Yes. I've been thinking about everything. I sat down. Okay. I owe you an apology. My heart lifted before I could stop it. Thank you. I shouldn't have called you selfish. No. I was under pressure. I know. There was a long silence. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. I have another proposal. My heart sank. Another proposal, yes. What kind? He hesitated. It's not exactly a loan. I closed my eyes. Matthew, what is it? I'll come over tonight. Why? Because I need you to sign something. The words from Daniel's warning came rushing back. Before your son asks you to sign anything. I opened my eyes. And suddenly the peace I had felt the night before was gone. Because I knew one thing for certain. Matthew was coming back. And this time he wasn't coming empty-handed. I didn't confront him. Matthew said he would come over that evening. After we ended the call, I remained at the kitchen table with my phone in my hand. A part of me wanted to call him back immediately. I wanted to ask what he needed me to sign. I wanted to know whether it involved my house, another loan, or something even more serious. But I remembered Daniel's warning. Before your son asks you to sign anything. And for the first time in my life, I decided not to rush toward an answer simply because my son was waiting for one. I called Rebecca instead. She answered on the third ring. Caroline Matthew says he has another proposal. Rebecca became quiet. What kind of proposal? He says it's not exactly a loan. He says he needs me to sign something. Did he tell you what? No. Then don't sign anything. I wasn't planning to. Good. Her voice was calm but firm. Send me a copy of whatever he brings before you sign it. I will. And Caroline, yes, don't let him pressure you into signing something simply because he says it's urgent. I looked toward the window. I think urgency is becoming his favorite word. Rebecca sighed. Then make patience yours. After we hung up, I called my financial advisor, Michael. He reviewed the information Daniel had shared with me and asked me a question I hadn't expected. Do you actually want to lend Matthew this money? I was quiet. I want to help my son. That isn't what I asked. I sighed. No. Michael waited. I don't want to lend him $180,000. Why? Because I don't think the company is in a position where another large check solves the underlying problem. That's an important distinction. I love him. I know. But I don't want to risk my retirement. Then you already know your answer. I stared at my hands. It was strange how simple it sounded when someone else said it. My answer wasn't hidden. I had simply been afraid to admit it. That evening, Matthew arrived at 6:42. I knew because I watched his car pull into the driveway. He was alone. Lauren wasn't with him. That made me nervous. He walked to the front door carrying a thin black folder. Not the thick leather folder from 2 weeks earlier. Something smaller, more deliberate. I opened the door before he knocked. Hi, Mom. Hi. He leaned forward as if he might hug me, then stopped. I wasn't sure whether I was relieved or hurt. Can I come in? Of course. He stepped inside. For a few seconds, neither of us knew what to say. The last time he had been in my house, he had called me selfish. Now he stood in the same hallway looking exhausted. I've been thinking about what I said. So have I. He nodded. I shouldn't have said it. No, I was angry. I know. He looked at me. I'm sorry. The apology sounded genuine. That made everything harder, because I wanted to believe it. I wanted to step forward, hug him, and tell him we could forget the whole thing. But I had learned that forgiveness and trust weren't the same thing. Thank you for apologizing, I said. He nodded. Can we sit down? We went into the kitchen. Matthew sat across from me. For several seconds he stared at the black folder. Then he pushed it toward me. This is what I need you to sign. I didn't touch it. What is it? It's a revised financing arrangement. For the $180,000 partly. My stomach tightened. Partly. He sighed. The private lender wants additional assurance. There it is. What additional assurance? He looked confused. It's normal. Is it? Yes. What kind? Matthew opened the folder. Inside was a formal document with several pages of legal language. He turned to a marked section. I need you to acknowledge that you're willing to support the financing if necessary. I stared at the page. What does support mean? It doesn't mean you'll automatically have to pay anything. Then why am I signing it? Because it shows the lender that family assets could be available if things don't go according to plan. Family assets, I almost laughed. Which family assets? Matthew hesitated. My understanding is that they want confirmation that additional collateral could be considered. What collateral? He didn't answer. I looked at him. My house. His eyes changed. Only for a second. But I saw it. Possibly. I leaned back. So Daniel was right. Matthew froze. Daniel. I didn't say anything. He stared at me. You talked to Daniel, yes. When, 2 weeks ago? His face went pale. Why? Because he called me. Matthew's jaw tightened. I had no right. He called because I was being asked to participate financially. He shouldn't have discussed my business with you. He didn't give me everything. He showed me information directly relevant to the money you were asking me to provide. Matthew stood. This is unbelievable. Sit down. No. You went behind my back. I didn't go behind your back. You talked to my accountant. Your accountant called me. You knew I didn't want him involved. You didn't tell me that. Matthew paced toward the window. This is exactly why I didn't want you involved. Then you shouldn't have built my money into your financing plan. He turned around. You don't understand. I understand more than you think. He stared at me. What did he tell you? I remained quiet. Mom. What did you expect me to do? I expected you to trust me. I expected you to tell me the truth. His shoulders dropped. For the first time, he looked less angry and more defeated. The company is in a difficult position. I know. I can fix it. I hope you can. I don't need you judging me. I'm not judging you. You are. No. I'm refusing to finance you without understanding the risk. Matthew looked at the document. The lender needs this. Then let the lender find another source of collateral. We don't have one. I know. Silence. He slowly sat down. I thought you would help. I tried to understand whether helping would actually help. He rubbed his forehead. You have no idea how much pressure I'm under. I believe you. You don't sound like it. Because believing you're under pressure doesn't mean I believe borrowing against my house is the answer. Matthew looked at me. What if I lose everything my heart broke? That was my son, not the angry businessman, not the man who called me selfish, the frightened child underneath all of it. What happens if you lose the company? I asked. I don't know. You rebuild. He laughed bitterly. It's not that easy. No, it isn't. I reached across the table but didn't touch him. But losing a business isn't the same as losing yourself. His eyes became wet. He looked away. I can't let my employees down. I know. I can't tell Lauren I failed. You haven't failed yet. It feels like I have. That was the first honest thing he'd said all evening. I sat quietly. Then I pushed the document back toward him. I won't sign this. He closed his eyes. Mom? No. Please. No. His eyes opened. You're really going to let this happen? I felt the old guilt rise again, but this time I recognized it. Guilt wasn't evidence. His disappointment didn't mean my decision was wrong. I am not making this happen, Matthew. You could stop it. I could risk my home trying to stop it. You wouldn't lose your home. You don't know that. I wouldn't let that happen. I almost smiled. You're asking me to trust your judgment about my house while admitting your company is already in financial trouble. He had no answer. I continued. I love you. I want you to succeed. But I will not sign away control over my property because you are afraid of what happens if your business fails. He looked at me for a long time. Then he picked up the papers. Fine. He put them back into the folder. You've made yourself clear. I have. He stood. At the doorway he stopped. You know what hurts? I waited. I thought Dad would have helped. I swallowed. Your father already helped you once. Matthew turned. What does that mean? I didn't tell him about the letter. Not yet. I wasn't ready. Instead I said, maybe that's part of the problem. His expression hardened. What problem? You've learned to believe that when something goes wrong, someone who loves you will make it disappear. He stared at me. Then he walked out. I watched his car disappear down the street. For the first time, I didn't cry. I went upstairs instead. I took Robert's letter from the fireproof box and read it again. Helping him cannot mean making his consequences disappear. The next morning I met Rebecca. She had prepared the documents removing Matthew as my successor financial agent. I read every page. There was no anger in them, no punishment, no dramatic disinheritance. Matthew remained my son. My grandchildren remained protected. My estate plan remained fundamentally intact. The only thing changing was who would have authority over my finances if I ever became unable to manage them myself. Rebecca explained that a professional fiduciary would take that role instead. I want you to understand, she said, this isn't necessarily about Matthew. It's about preserving your independence. I know. Are you sure? I thought about my son's face the night before. Yes, I signed. Then I called my financial advisor and reviewed my accounts again. We moved some funds into more appropriate retirement vehicles. We updated emergency reserves. We confirmed beneficiaries. We documented exactly how much I could comfortably spend each year without jeopardizing my future. Nothing dramatic happened. No courtroom, no police, no shouting, just paperwork. But when I left the office, I felt as though I had finally locked the doors of my financial life, not against my son, for myself. That evening, Matthew sent me a text. "I'm sorry I pressured you. I still don't understand your decision, but I'm sorry." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied, "I love you." My answer about the money is still no. I put my phone down. For once, I didn't add an explanation. I didn't apologize. I didn't offer another solution. I simply let my answer stand. And that was when I realized something important. A boundary doesn't become cruel just because the person receiving it is disappointed. Sometimes the most loving thing a mother can do is stop standing between her adult child and the consequences waiting for him. I thought the hardest part was finished, but I had no idea what was about to happen to Matthew's company once the money he expected never arrived. Because within days, his largest supplier stopped extending credit, and the first person Matthew called wasn't his accountant. It was me. He came back with papers. 3 days after I refused to sign the financing agreement, Matthew called me at 7:18 in the morning. I almost didn't answer. Not because I didn't love him, because I was learning that every time my son called, my stomach tightened before I even heard his voice. "Mom." His voice sounded exhausted. "Yes." "Then I come by tonight?" I looked out the kitchen window. "Why I need to talk to you? About the company." "Yes." I waited. Then he added, "And I owe you another apology." That caught me off guard. "All right, I'll come after work." When we ended the call, I stood in my kitchen for several minutes. 3 days earlier, he had left my house angry after I refused to sign papers that could eventually put my home at risk. Now he wanted to come back. I didn't know whether to expect another argument or something different. That afternoon, I received a call from Daniel. "Mrs. Jenkins, I wanted to let you know something." "What is it?" "The lender has decided not to proceed with the original proposal." I sat down. Because I refused, not entirely. What happened without the family support component? The risk profile changed. I almost laughed. So my house really was part of the plan. Daniel was quiet. Yes. That one word hurt. Not because my property had been legally touched. It hadn't. But because Matthew had apparently built his expectations around something that was never his to offer. What happens now? Matthew will need to work with his existing creditors. Is the company in danger? Yes. The honesty surprised me. How much danger? I can't predict the outcome. Will employees be paid? That's one of the issues being addressed. I closed my eyes. This was exactly what I had feared. Daniel. Yes. Did I make things worse by refusing? No. He answered so quickly that I opened my eyes. Are you sure? Yes. Why? Because the company already had problems before you were asked for money. Your refusal didn't create those problems. It simply prevented another source of capital from temporarily covering them. I absorbed that slowly. Temporary. Yes, that word stayed with me. After we hung up, I thought about Matthew's employees. I imagined people waiting for paychecks. People with mortgages. People with children. It would have been easier if this were simply about my son. But businesses don't exist in isolation. Every bad financial decision reaches someone else. At 6:51 that evening, Matthew pulled into my driveway. This time he wasn't carrying the thin black folder. He carried nothing. When I opened the door, he looked older. Not physically. Emotionally. "Hi, Mom." "Hi." He stepped inside. I expected him to head toward the kitchen. Instead, he stood in the hallway. "I don't know how to say this. Try." He took a breath. The lender pulled out. "I know." His eyes narrowed. "You know, Daniel called me." He looked away. Of course he did. "Matthew." He rubbed his face. They wanted additional security. Your house. He nodded. I know. I told them you wouldn't sign. I know. How they told me. I gave a tired laugh. I guess your accountant isn't the only person who knows how to communicate. I didn't respond. He finally walked into the kitchen and sat down. I sat across from him. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said, I owe you another apology. I waited. I shouldn't have called you selfish. No. I shouldn't have told other people you were refusing to help your own family. No. I shouldn't have acted like your money was something I had a right to. That one surprised me. I looked at him. He kept his eyes on the table. I was wrong. I wanted to believe him. But I had learned that apologies mattered most when followed by different behavior. What happened? He sighed. Everything I was trying to avoid. Tell me. The supplier stopped extending credit. I nodded slowly. When yesterday. And payroll, I covered part of it. With what? My personal account. How much do you have left? He looked at me. I'm not asking you for money. I didn't ask whether you were. He swallowed. Not much. My heart hurt. Not because I wanted to give him money, because I could see how frightened he was. What about the contracts? One client agreed to an earlier partial payment. That's good. It helps. What about the others? Still waiting. He leaned back. I've spent the last 2 years thinking I was one big project away from everything being okay. I didn't interrupt. I kept hiring because I thought the next projects were coming. I bought equipment because I thought we'd need it. I took short-term financing because I thought customer payments would catch up. And they didn't. No. He looked at his hands. Then one thing went wrong. Then another. I thought about Robert's letter. The next opportunity will fix the last mistake. Matthew was finally saying it himself. I should have stopped sooner. Yes. He looked at me. You could at least pretend to disagree. I smiled sadly. You don't need me to pretend anymore. For the first time that evening he smiled. It disappeared quickly. I have another problem. What the lender's attorney wants the financing proposal formally withdrawn. That's probably wise. It's embarrassing. I know. They've seen everything. Then maybe that's what needed to happen. He looked at me. Mom, do you know what the worst part is? What I thought I was protecting everyone. I didn't answer. My employees. Lauren. The kids. You. Me. Yes. How are you protecting me? He looked ashamed. I thought if the company survived, I'd repay you. Everything would be fine, and nobody would ever know how close I came to losing it. I stared at him. You thought I would rather be lied to than know you were struggling. No. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I couldn't stand the idea of you seeing me fail. That sentence broke through every defensive wall I had built. I understood that feeling. I had felt it myself after Robert died. There had been mornings when I didn't know how to get out of bed, but I still answered the phone and said I'm fine. Matthew had been doing the same thing with his business. Except his version of I'm fine had cost him far more. I reached across the table. This time I touched his hand. I don't think you're a failure. His eyes became wet. But I think you've made serious mistakes. He nodded. And those mistakes are yours to repair. I know. You're going to have to make difficult choices. I know. Some people may leave. I know. You may have to sell things. I know. You may have to shrink the company. He looked down. I know. And none of those things mean you are worthless. His shoulders lowered. For several seconds he simply sat there. Then he said, Would you help me figure out what to do? I considered the question. Yes. His eyes lifted. But not with money. His expression fell slightly. I know. I'll help you think. He nodded. I'll help you find professionals. Another nod. I'll help with the children if you and Lauren need breathing room. He swallowed. But I won't sign over my house, I know. And I won't empty my retirement. I know. He squeezed my hand. Okay. That was the first time the word didn't sound like defeat. It sounded like acceptance. Later that evening he left without asking me for $1. I watched him walk down the driveway. He looked smaller somehow. But maybe that wasn't weakness. Maybe it was the first time he wasn't carrying an image of himself that was too heavy to maintain. The following morning, Daniel sent me an email confirming that the original financing proposal was no longer moving forward. There was no mention of my house, no legal action, no threat, just a clean ending. I thought that would bring relief. Instead, I felt sadness, because I knew Matthew's company was about to enter its hardest period. Over the next week, things moved quickly. Matthew sold one of the newer work vehicles. He returned equipment he had financed but rarely used. He canceled a planned office expansion. He reduced his own salary. He met with suppliers. He negotiated payment schedules. He sat down with employees and admitted the company had expanded too quickly. According to Daniel, that meeting was the hardest thing Matthew had ever done. He expected people to quit. Some did, but several stayed. One longtime employee told him, "I'd rather work for a smaller company that tells me the truth than a bigger one pretending everything is fine." When Matthew told me that, he looked almost embarrassed. "I deserved that." "You probably did." He laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I had heard from him in weeks. But the hardest conversation was still waiting. Lauren. That Friday evening, Matthew called me. "Mom." "Yes, Lauren knows everything." I sat down. How did she react? She asked me why I didn't tell her sooner, and I didn't have a good answer. I closed my eyes. Sometimes the truth doesn't destroy families. The secrets built around it do. I told her I wanted to fix everything before she found out. What did she say? Matthew's voice became quiet. She said she wished I had trusted her enough to let her be scared with me. That sentence stayed with me, because I understood. Love wasn't supposed to mean protecting someone from every frightening truth. Sometimes love meant allowing them to stand beside you while you faced it. 2 weeks after Matthew first asked me for $180,000, I had believed the worst thing he could do was call me selfish. Now I understood that the word wasn't the real wound. The real wound was the assumption beneath it. He believed my love should have overridden my judgment. He believed family meant access. And I had spent years unintentionally teaching him that rescue was part of love. Now we were both learning something different. A week later, Matthew came to my house again. He sat at my kitchen table. No folder, no loan proposal, no request. He simply looked at me and said, "Mom, I need to tell you something about the financing plan." I waited. "There was something in those documents you haven't seen." My stomach tightened. What Matthew looked directly at me. "I wasn't just planning to ask about your house if the $180,000 wasn't enough." He swallowed. "I had already told someone that I believed you would eventually agree. You counted my money before I was gone." Matthew's words stayed in the air between us. I wasn't sure I had heard him correctly. "You believed I would eventually agree?" He nodded. "I thought you would." "To what?" "To the additional financing." "Against my house?" His eyes dropped. "Yes." I leaned back in my chair. The kitchen suddenly felt much smaller. For weeks I had been trying to understand whether Matthew had made one desperate financial mistake or whether something deeper was wrong. Now I had my answer. He hadn't simply hoped I would help. He had already built my future into his plans. "Tell me exactly what you told them." Matthew rubbed both hands over his face. "I told them my mother was financially secure." I stared at him. "And I told them you owned the house outright, and that you had substantial savings, and," I hesitated, "that you would likely support the company if it became necessary." My heart sank. "You told them I would likely support you?" "Yes, without asking me." "I know. You made promises about my property that I never made." "I know." I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the maple tree Robert and I had planted years ago moved gently in the afternoon breeze. Matthew remained seated behind me. I could feel my anger building. Not the sharp anger I had felt when he called me selfish. Something colder. "You counted my money before I was gone." He flinched. "Mom, that is what you did. I wasn't thinking about you dying." "Then what were you thinking?" He didn't answer. I turned around. "Were you thinking about inheritance?" His face changed. "That was enough. You were. Not exactly. Matthew. He looked down. I knew someday the house would probably be mine. There it was. The sentence I had never expected to hear from my son. Not I hoped. Not I dreamed. Mine. As though ownership had already happened simply because I was his mother. I sat down again. When did you decide that I don't know? Try. He swallowed. After Dad died, I started thinking about what would happen eventually. Eventually. Yes. And you started including my assets in your financial planning. I didn't think of it that way. How did you think of it? I thought of it as family. I closed my eyes. Family. That word had been used so many times during the past month that I almost hated hearing it. Family doesn't mean you get to spend what belongs to someone else. I know that now. You should have known it before. I should have. I looked at him. Why didn't you tell me the truth when you asked for the $180,000? Because I knew you'd say no. The honesty was brutal. You knew yes. Then why ask? Because I thought if I made it sound temporary, you might say yes. I felt something inside me break. Not my trust. That had already cracked. Something more tender. The belief that Matthew still saw me primarily as his mother, rather than as a financial resource. He continued. I was scared. I know. I'd lost 2 major contracts. One project had gone badly. I had debts piling up. Suppliers were calling. Payroll was getting harder. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I couldn't admit I had screwed up. You could have admitted it to me. I couldn't. Why? He looked at me. Because Dad never failed. I stared at him. What Dad always knew what to do. He always had a plan. When something went wrong, he fixed it. I thought about Robert, the man who had repaired broken appliances, electrical panels, leaky pipes, and somehow half the problems in the neighborhood. But I knew something Matthew didn't. Robert had failed plenty of times. He simply hadn't allowed failure to become an identity. Your father made mistakes. Matthew shook his head. Not like me. More than you know. He looked confused. I wasn't ready to tell him everything. Not yet. Your father wasn't perfect. I know. No, I don't think you do. I reached for the fireproof box beside me. Matthew noticed it. What's that? Something your father left me. His face changed. What a letter. I took it out. I didn't hand it to him. Your father wrote about your business. Matthew's expression went pale. What did he say? He wrote that he had once paid $27,000 of your business debt. Matthew closed his eyes. I watched the realization spread across his face. He told you years ago. I thought he forgot about that. He didn't. Matthew rubbed his forehead. Mom. He wrote that he helped you because he hoped you would learn from it. Matthew stared at the table. Did he hate me? The question surprised me. No. Then why would he write something like that because he loved you? Matthew looked up. I continued. He wrote that helping you couldn't mean making your consequences disappear. Tears appeared in his eyes. He really wrote that, yes. Matthew covered his face. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, I thought he believed in me. He did. Then why didn't he tell me maybe he was trying to protect you from shame? Matthew laughed bitterly. He protected me too much. I thought about that. Maybe he was right. Robert had rescued him once. I had spent years rescuing him in smaller ways. Perhaps we had both taught Matthew something neither of us intended. That being loved meant being protected from consequences. I reached across the table. Your father believed in you, but believing in someone doesn't mean preventing them from learning. Matthew nodded slowly. I understand that now. I hope you do. He wiped his eyes, then his voice became quieter. I need to tell you something else. I waited. When I first started talking to the lender, I didn't tell them the house was definitely available. What did you say? I said you were financially secure and that family support was likely. Why? Because I needed the lender to believe I had another option. And you thought that option was me? Yes. Not your own assets. He looked down. I didn't have enough. Not your own money. No, not your own house. No. I swallowed. You thought my security would make you look more secure. Yes. The simplicity of the answer hurt. Matthew, do you understand what that means? He nodded. I used your stability to hide my instability. I looked at him. That was perhaps the most honest sentence he had spoken since this began. Yes. He sat quietly. Then he said I was wrong. I believed him. But belief wasn't the same as forgiveness. Not yet. I don't want to punish you, I said. I know. I don't want your company to fail. I know. I don't want your children to suffer. I know. But I also won't rescue you. He nodded. I know. And if the company fails, I'll rebuild. If you have to start over, I'll start over. If you have to work for someone else for a while. He gave a small smile. I'll work for someone else. I smiled too. That sounds more like the man your father raised. His eyes filled again. I miss him. So do I. We sat in silence. Then Matthew looked at me. Are you going to change your will? The question surprised me. I didn't answer immediately. Why? Because I assumed... He stopped. You assumed you'd inherit everything. Yes. I nodded slowly. I've changed some things. His face fell. Because of me? Because of me. He looked confused. I want my estate organized in a way that protects me first. Okay. That doesn't mean you get nothing. I don't want to talk about inheritance. Good. He looked at me. I don't want my relationship with you to be about what I get when you're gone. Those words touched me. Maybe because they were the opposite of everything he'd been doing. I hope you mean that. I do. He stood. At the doorway, he stopped. Mom. Yes, I'm sorry I made you feel like your money mattered more than our relationship. I nodded. And I'm sorry I let other people think you were selfish. That hurt. I know. You should know something else. What I never wanted you to fail. I know. I wanted you to learn. He nodded. Then he walked away. For the first time since this began, I didn't feel like I had won. I felt tired, relieved, sad, and strangely hopeful. The following week, Matthew made difficult decisions. He closed the office he had leased for expansion. He sold a newer truck. He renegotiated supplier balances. He stopped using business credit cards for personal expenses. He cut his own salary. He met with employees and admitted he had expanded too quickly. Some employees left, others stayed. The company became smaller, much smaller, but it became honest. Matthew stopped chasing every possible project. He focused on profitable work. Daniel helped him create strict financial controls. No mixing personal and business expenses. No taking on new debt without reviewing cash flow. No assuming future revenue would solve present obligations. And no family assets appearing on a financing proposal unless the owner had actually agreed. I didn't give Matthew $100,000. I didn't give him $50,000. I didn't give him $5,000. What I gave him instead was something harder, the space to solve his own problem. It wasn't comfortable. There were nights when I wanted to call him and offer help. There were mornings when I worried about my grandchildren. But every time I felt tempted, I remembered Robert's letter. Don't answer from guilt. Answer from wisdom. Months later, Matthew called me. Mom. Yes, I think the company is going to survive. I smiled. That's wonderful. We're smaller. There's nothing wrong with smaller. We're actually making money again. I laughed. Then perhaps smaller was exactly what you needed. There was a pause. Can I come over Sunday? Of course. Just for lunch. No business, no business. I hung up and smiled. For the first time in months, my kitchen table didn't feel like a negotiation room. It felt like home again. And I thought that perhaps the most painful thing about loving an adult child is learning that you cannot live their life for them. You can advise, you can encourage, you can forgive. But sometimes you have to step aside and let them discover whether they can stand without you holding them up. I had spent years believing that saying yes proved I loved Matthew. Now I understood something very different. Sometimes love sounds like yes. And sometimes when the stakes are high enough, love has to sound like no. The business finally broke. For a few weeks after Matthew admitted the truth, I allowed myself to believe the worst was behind us. His company had stopped chasing unrealistic expansion. He had sold one of the newer trucks, returned equipment he didn't need, closed the office he had rented for growth, and begun negotiating honestly with suppliers. He was smaller, he was embarrassed, but he was moving in the right direction. Then one Monday morning, everything changed. My phone rang at 6:47. It was Matthew. Mom. His voice was so quiet that I immediately sat down. What happened? The company is shutting down for a few days. I felt my chest tighten. What do you mean? I can't keep operating like this. I closed my eyes. What about the projects? One client canceled. Canceled. They terminated the contract. Why? Because we couldn't meet the revised timeline after the supplier stopped extending credit. I swallowed. And the other projects, one is still moving forward, and the rest? He was silent. Matthew. I don't know. That was the first time I heard genuine defeat in his voice. Not anger. Not frustration. Defeat. Come over, I said. I don't want to. Why? Because I'm embarrassed. You're my son. That doesn't make this less embarrassing. No. But it means you don't have to face it alone. He came 2 hours later. When I opened the door, he looked exhausted. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes were red. He carried a stack of papers under one arm. We went into the kitchen. He dropped the papers onto the table. I can't do this anymore. I poured him coffee. I didn't touch it. I've spent almost 2 years trying to make the company look bigger than it really was. I sat across from him. I know. I thought if I kept winning projects, everything would catch up. But it didn't. No. He rubbed his face. I kept thinking the next payment would fix the previous problem. I remembered Robert's letter. The next opportunity will fix the last mistake. Matthew looked at me. I finally understand what Dad meant. I didn't answer. He continued. I thought debt was temporary because everything was temporary. A late payment, a bad project, a slow month, a supplier issue. He shook his head. But they started stacking. I nodded. How much do you owe now? He gave me the figure. It was lower than the number I had originally feared because he had already sold assets and negotiated several balances. But it was still enough to frighten me. What are you going to do? I don't know. Have you spoken to Daniel? Yes. What does he say? He says the company can survive if I reduce it drastically. Then do that. Matthew looked at me. It's not that simple. Why? Because I have employees. How many? 8. Do all 8 need to stay? He looked down. No. Can you keep the ones who are essential? Probably. Then start there. He sighed. Some of them have been with me for years. I know. That makes it worse. Matthew, keeping 8 people employed for another month because you can't bear to disappoint them isn't kindness if it guarantees the company collapses. He looked at me. You sound like Dad. I'll take that as a compliment. For the first time he smiled, then the smile disappeared. I may have to sell the house. I knew immediately which house he meant. Your house. He nodded. Lauren's house. The beautiful suburban home they had bought after the company started doing well. The house with the renovated kitchen, the large backyard, and the room they had decorated for each child. What does Lauren think she knows? And she agrees. That surprised me. She said we'd rather lose the house than lose everything else. I felt a strange mixture of sadness and respect. That sounds like a painful decision. It is. Are you sure you have to? Yes. Then sell it. He looked at me. Just like that? No. Not just like that. I reached across the table. Selling a house isn't the same as losing your life. He stared at me. You really believe that? Yes. Even after everything. Especially after everything. The house sold 3 weeks later. Not for the price they had hoped, but enough to eliminate the home equity line and several personal obligations that had become tangled with the business. Lauren and the children moved into a modest rental. Matthew moved his office into a small room attached to one of his remaining workspaces. The change was enormous. For years, Matthew had measured success by square footage. Now he measured it by whether the company's bank account remained positive at the end of the month. The first time I visited their rental, I almost cried. The living room was smaller. The furniture didn't match. There were still boxes stacked against one wall. My granddaughter ran toward me anyway. "Grandma," I opened my arms. She hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. For a few minutes I forgot about money. Then I saw Matthew standing in the doorway. He looked ashamed. "I'm sorry they have to live like this." I looked at him. "They have a home. A rental. A home." He lowered his eyes. I walked toward him. "Don't teach your children that a smaller house means a smaller life." He nodded. "I know. Do you?" "Yes." I touched his shoulder. "Then remember it. I wanted to help financially. Of course I did. I could have written a check. I could have paid their security deposit. I could have offered to cover several months of rent. But I knew exactly what would happen. One rescue would become another. Not because Matthew was evil, because desperation makes people remember where relief came from. Instead, I helped differently. I brought groceries. I watched the children when Matthew and Lauren had meetings. I cooked large Sunday dinners. I helped Lauren organize the children's school schedules. And when Matthew asked me whether I thought he should sell another vehicle, I helped him make a list of the numbers. I did not make the decision for him. That distinction mattered. One evening, Matthew came to my house after meeting with his employees. He sat on the back porch, the same porch where Robert had once warned me. "I had to let 3 people go," he said. I sat beside him. "How did it go?" "Terrible." He stared into the backyard. One of them cried. "I'm sorry. I apologized. What did you say?" I told him I should have made these decisions 6 months earlier. That was honest. He said he appreciated that. Matthew laughed bitterly. "Appreciated being fired. No. Appreciated being told the truth." He looked at me. "Mom, I used to think leadership meant never admitting you were wrong. And now maybe leadership means admitting it before everyone else pays for it." I smiled. "That's a lesson worth learning." He leaned back. "I wish I'd learned it before you got involved." "You mean before you asked me for the money?" "Yes." I looked at him. "Maybe you had to reach the point where someone could say no." He nodded. "I hated you for it." "I know. I thought you were abandoning me." "I know. But you weren't." "No. You were the only person who wouldn't let me hide." I felt tears come to my eyes. "That wasn't easy." "I know." The company eventually became much smaller. Matthew kept only the projects he could realistically manage. He stopped promising clients impossible completion dates. He stopped using future contracts to justify current spending. He paid suppliers according to negotiated schedules. He separated every personal expense from every business expense. Daniel helped him build a monthly cash flow system that Matthew had once considered unnecessary. Now he checked it every Friday morning. One afternoon he called me laughing. "Mom, guess what? I have 3 months of operating expenses in reserve." I smiled. "That's wonderful. Do you know how strange it feels? What, having money sitting there and not spending it?" I laughed. "That sounds like something your father would have enjoyed hearing. I wish he could see this. So do I." There was a pause. Then Matthew said, "You know what I finally understand? The $180,000 wouldn't have fixed me." I didn't respond. "It would have fixed the immediate problem, yes. And then I'd have found another problem, yes. And if things got worse, I'd have come back for more." I looked toward Robert's photograph on the bookshelf. Probably. I would have kept telling myself it was temporary. "Yes." Matthew's voice became quiet. "You saved me by refusing me." That sentence stayed with me, but I wasn't ready to call it saving. "I didn't save you. What do you call it? I stopped saving you from yourself." He laughed softly. "That's probably more accurate." The months passed. The company didn't return to what it had been. It didn't need to. It became profitable again. Not wildly profitable, not impressive enough for glossy brochures, but stable. Matthew's pride had changed. He no longer talked about becoming the biggest renovation company in Charlotte. He talked about finishing projects well, paying people on time, keeping reserves, going home for dinner. Lauren changed too. She stopped worrying every time Matthew's phone rang. The children stopped hearing words like cash flow problem at the dinner table. And I stopped waiting for another financial emergency. I thought we had finally reached peace. Then one afternoon, Daniel called me. Mrs. Jenkins. Yes, I wanted to tell you something before Matthew does. My heart immediately tightened. What happened? Nothing bad. I waited. Actually, something very good. What? Daniel laughed. Your son has asked me to help him build a permanent financial control system for the company. That sounds good. It is. What changed everything? I smiled. That's a big statement. It is. He has stopped treating accounting as something he does after making decisions. He's using it to make decisions. I felt proud. Then Daniel added, and there's something else. What? Matthew specifically instructed me that no family assets are to appear in any financing discussion unless the owner has independently agreed in writing. I closed my eyes. My son had finally drawn the line himself. Did he say why? Daniel paused. He said he never wants you to feel like your house is part of his business again. I swallowed hard. That meant more to me than any repayment. Because Matthew wasn't simply becoming financially responsible. I was beginning to understand the boundary he had violated. That evening I sat on my porch as the sun went down. I thought about the woman I had been 3 months earlier. Guilty. Afraid. Convinced that saying no might destroy my relationship with my only son. Now I understood something I wished every mother could learn before she needed it. You can love someone without funding them. You can support someone without rescuing them. You can offer a hand without handing over your entire future. And sometimes the strongest way to say I believe you can do this is to stop making it possible for them to avoid doing it. I thought the hardest lesson was finally over. But Matthew still had one last thing to tell me. And when he came to my house the following Sunday, he wasn't carrying a loan agreement. He was carrying something that had nothing to do with money. A handwritten letter. And before he gave it to me, he said, Mom, I need you to read this before you decide whether you can forgive me. The accountant's second message. I stared at the folded letter in Matthew's hand. For a moment, I didn't take it. I had seen enough paperwork during the past several months to last me a lifetime. Loan agreements, financial statements, debt schedules, property valuations, restructuring proposals. Every document seemed to carry another reminder that my son had once looked at my life and seen numbers. But this was different. It was handwritten. There was no company logo, no lender's name, no legal language, just my son's handwriting across the front. Mom. I looked up at him. What is this? Everything I couldn't say. My throat tightened. Then say it. He shook his head. I've tried. Try again. He smiled sadly. I think I'll say it better this way. I took the letter. Matthew remained standing. You don't have to read it now, he said. I looked at him. You came here for a reason. Yes. Then sit down. He sat across from me. I opened the envelope. The letter was 3 pages long. The first line made my eyes sting. Mom, I used to think you were the person who would always catch me. I stopped reading. Not because the sentence was cruel, because it was honest. I continued. I thought that was what mothers did. I thought Dad would have done the same. I thought if I worked hard enough afterward, nobody would ever know I needed help. I was wrong. I wasn't just asking you for money. I was asking you to protect me from consequences I had created myself. My vision blurred. I wiped my eyes and kept reading. I should have told you the company was struggling. I should have told you about the lost contracts. I should have told you about the debts. I should have told you I had already talked about your house before you ever agreed to anything. Instead, I told myself I was protecting you from worrying. The truth is that I was protecting myself from being embarrassed. I stopped again. Matthew looked at the floor. I meant every word he said quietly. I continued. When you said no, I called you selfish because it was easier to make you feel guilty than admit I was scared. I told relatives you wouldn't help me. I made myself the victim because I couldn't stand being the person who had made the mistake. I folded the letter slightly. That part hurt. Not because I hadn't known. Because seeing it written down made it impossible to pretend otherwise. The next paragraph was shorter. You were right about one thing. I didn't need your money. I needed to stop. I needed someone to stop me. I looked up. Matthew's eyes were wet. Keep reading, he whispered. So I did. The company is smaller now. I make less money. I drive an older truck. I don't have the office I wanted. We live in a rental. But for the first time in years, I know exactly what my company owes, exactly what it earns, and exactly what I can afford. I don't wake up wondering which bill I'm going to move to next week. I don't tell myself the next project will save me. I don't look at Mom's house and think about what it could solve. I swallowed. That last sentence stayed with me. I finished the letter. I don't expect you to trust me because I'm sorry. I know trust has to come back slowly. I don't expect you to change your will because I apologized. I don't expect you to give me another chance financially. I only hope that one day you can look at me and see your son again, not the man who tried to turn your security into his solution. Love, Matthew. I lowered the paper. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Matthew remained silent. Then I said, "That was honest. I tried." "You did." He nodded. I folded the letter carefully. "I don't know if I can forgive everything yet. I understand. But I believe you mean what you wrote." His eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." I reached across the table. He took my hand. We sat that way for a while. There was no dramatic embrace. No perfect ending. Just two people sitting at the same kitchen table where so many arguments had happened, finally speaking without money between us. A week later, I received another call. It was Daniel. "Mrs. Jenkins." "Yes, I wanted to give you an up." I smiled. "Should I be worried?" "No." "That sounds promising." "It is." Daniel explained that Matthew had formally asked him to establish permanent financial controls for Jenkins' residential renovations. No new borrowing without documented cash flow analysis. No mixing personal and business expenses. No equipment purchases without reviewing reserves. No taking on projects based solely on projected revenue. And most importantly, no reference to family assets in any financing documents unless the owner had independently authorized it. I closed my eyes. "Did Matthew tell you why he wanted that last part?" "Yes." "What did he say?" Daniel paused. "He said he never wants you to wonder again whether your house is part of his business plan." I felt tears gather in my eyes. That sentence meant more than an apology. It meant Matthew had finally understood the boundary himself. "Is the company doing better?" "Yes." "How much better?" "It's not the company it was, I know. But that's actually a good thing." Daniel explained that the smaller operation had lower overhead and more predictable cash flow. Matthew was completing fewer projects, but the projects he accepted were profitable. He had rebuilt relationships with several suppliers by paying them according to agreed schedules. One supplier had even restored his previous credit terms. "That's wonderful." "It is." Daniel laughed softly. "Matthew told me yesterday that he never wants to grow that quickly again." I smiled. His father would have liked that. "I think so." After we hung up, I sat on the porch. The same maple tree, the same rocking chair Robert had loved. But I felt different. For months I had thought my refusal had caused Matthew's hardship. Now I understood something important. His hardship had already existed. My refusal simply meant he could no longer hide it behind my savings. The following Sunday, Matthew and his family came for dinner. Lauren brought a pie. The children ran through the house as though nothing had ever happened. My granddaughter found the old photograph of Robert on the mantel. "Grandpa looked funny here." I laughed. "He did." Matthew walked over. "What year was that?" "Your 40th birthday." He looked at the photograph. "I remember that day. You were late." "I was 17. You were always late." He smiled. "I got that from Dad." "You absolutely did not." Everyone laughed. For a moment the past felt lighter. Later, while Lauren helped me in the kitchen, Matthew stood beside me. I got something today. What? He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket. I looked at him suspiciously. If that's another loan agreement, I'm sending you home. He laughed. No. He handed it to me. It was a copy of a financial statement from the company. At the bottom was a simple line, cash reserve. I looked at the number. It wasn't enormous, but it was healthy. What is this, my reserve? I looked at him. You have money sitting there, yes, and you're not spending it. I'm trying very hard not to. I smiled. Your father would be proud. Matthew nodded. I think so too. Then he became serious. There's something I want you to understand. What when you refused me, I thought you were choosing your money over me. I waited. Now I understand you were choosing not to let me destroy something you and Dad spent your lives building. I didn't know what to say. He continued. But that's not even the biggest thing. What is you trusted me enough to believe I could survive hearing no? My eyes filled with tears. That may be the nicest thing you've ever said to me. He laughed softly. I've had some practice. I reached up and touched his cheek. You're still my son. I know. That never changed. I know. But the way I love you has changed. His expression became thoughtful. How I don't feel responsible for fixing your life anymore. He smiled. That probably makes both of us healthier. It does. We stood quietly. Then he hugged me. This time I didn't hesitate. I held my son tightly. Not because the company was successful. Not because he had repaid anything. Not because my house was safe. Because he was finally standing beside me as an adult. And I was finally able to stand beside him without carrying him. Months passed. The company continued to improve. Matthew didn't become wealthy. He didn't need to. He became stable. He paid himself a reasonable salary. He kept reserves. He stopped confusing growth with success. Lauren seemed happier. The children seemed calmer. And I stopped checking my phone every time Matthew called. That was perhaps the greatest sign that trust was returning. Then one Friday afternoon, Daniel called again. I have one last update for you. I smiled. Go ahead. Matthew has formally removed all references to family real estate from his financing records. I nodded. I knew he would. He also asked me to document something. What? He wants any future business lender to understand that family assets are not part of his company's financial plan. I closed my eyes. Good. He said your house is your house. I laughed through my tears. That's a simple sentence. Sometimes simple is better. After the call, I walked through my house. I touched the kitchen table, the staircase, the framed photographs, Robert's chair. Everything was still there. Nothing had been lost. But more importantly, something had been restored. Not money, not property, trust. And I realized that the $180,000 I had refused had never really been the central question. The real question had been whether I could love my son without allowing fear to control me. Whether I could say no without believing I was abandoning him. Whether I could let him fall without pushing him away. And whether he could learn to stand without expecting me to catch him. For the first time in a very long time, I believe the answer to all three questions was yes. There was one thing left unresolved. Matthew had changed. His company had changed. Our relationship had changed. But I had one final decision to make about my money. And this time the decision wouldn't be about punishment. It wouldn't be about making Matthew suffer. It would be about making sure that the mistakes of one generation didn't become the burden of the next. My son finally told me the truth. For the first time in months, I woke up without checking my phone for a message from Matthew. That may sound like a small thing. It wasn't. For months, every unexpected call had made my heart jump. Every unfamiliar number made me wonder whether another supplier had called, whether another bill had gone unpaid, or whether Matthew had found another reason to ask for help. Now there was silence. Not the painful silence that followed Robert's death. A peaceful one, the kind that told me nothing was on fire. My life had begun returning to ordinary things. I watered the hydrangeas. I met Diane for lunch. I went to the grocery store on Wednesday mornings because it was less crowded. I attended my granddaughter's school play. I even started taking short walks again in the evenings. Matthew's company continued operating at a much smaller scale. He had become disciplined about money. He didn't talk about expansion anymore. When we spoke, he told me about projects, employees, and customers. Not debt, not emergencies, not opportunities that required my savings. Our relationship was changing slowly. There were still awkward moments. Sometimes he would start telling me something and then stop himself. Sometimes I would notice him looking at me as though he was afraid I might still be angry. And sometimes I realized I was still afraid to trust him completely. That was the truth. Forgiveness had begun. Trust was still under construction. Then one Saturday morning, Matthew called. "Mom, yes, can I come?" "Of course. Just me." I paused. "Is everything okay?" "Yes." He laughed softly. "I promise. No paperwork." That made me smile. "Then come." He arrived around noon. He wasn't carrying a folder. He wasn't holding an envelope. He wasn't even carrying the bakery box he usually brought when he wanted to soften a conversation. He simply walked up the driveway with his hands in his jacket pockets. When I opened the door, he hugged me. Not a quick hug, a real one. The kind that lasted long enough to make me realize how much I had missed him. "Hi, Mom. Hi." We went into the kitchen. He sat at the table. I poured coffee. For several minutes he said nothing. Finally he looked at me. "I need to tell you something." My old anxiety returned. "About the company number, money number, and then what?" He looked down at his coffee. "I've been thinking about Dad." I sat opposite him. "So have I." "I found something. What, a box in my garage?" He smiled faintly. Dad had given me some of his old tools when I started the company. There was an envelope tucked inside one of the drawers. My heart tightened. What was in it? A note. From him. Yes. I waited. What did it say? Matthew looked toward the window. He wrote something about me. What? He said I was talented. I smiled. That sounds like your father. But then he wrote that talent wasn't enough. I nodded. Your father believed that. He wrote that I needed discipline. Matthew laughed softly. I hated that word when I was younger. You hated every word that wasn't praise. That too. Then his expression became serious. He also wrote something else. I waited. He said, never build a life that requires another person to fail so you can succeed. My eyes filled with tears. That sounds like him. Matthew nodded. I didn't understand it. What do you understand now, that I was building a business where your financial security had become part of my business model? I swallowed. That was never supposed to happen. I know. He looked at me. I want you to know something. What, I don't expect anything from your estate. I blinked. Matthew? No, let me finish. He leaned forward. I don't want to know what accounts you have. I don't want to know what your house is worth. I don't want to know what you'll leave me. Why? Because every time I knew those numbers, I started thinking about what they could solve. His honesty stunned me. I don't want that anymore. I looked at my son. For years I had thought inheritance was simply part of being a parent. You work, you save, you leave something behind. But Matthew had taught me how easily an inheritance could become an invisible promise in someone's mind. A promise that didn't actually exist. I reached across the table. I'm glad you're telling me. I've been scared to. Why? Because I thought you might think I was only saying it because I know you changed your documents. I smiled sadly. I don't think that. I want you to know I'm not. I believe you. He looked relieved. Then he said, there's something else. I smiled. You have a lot of something elses. He laughed. I know. His expression became serious again. When the company started falling apart, I thought my life was falling apart. I listened. I thought losing the house meant I'd failed my family. He looked down. But then I saw the kids. What do you mean they didn't care about the house? I smiled. They cared about their parents. He nodded. My daughter asked me if we were still going to have pancakes on Saturday. My heart softened. What did you say? I said yes. He smiled. She said, then we're okay. I laughed through tears. Smart girl. Smarter than her father. That's not difficult. He laughed. Then the laughter faded. I realized I had spent years teaching myself that success meant giving my family more things. And maybe success means giving them more stability. I nodded. That sounds right. He looked at me. I don't want my children growing up thinking their grandfather's money belongs to them someday. I smiled. That may be the most important thing you've said. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I want them to learn what Dad tried to teach me. What did he try to teach you? Earn what you need. Protect what you have. Don't spend tomorrow's money today. I laughed. That sounds exactly like him. Matthew looked toward the hallway. Do you still have the letter he wrote you? Yes. Can I read it? I hesitated. Then I nodded. I went upstairs and returned with the fireproof box. I took out Robert's letter. Matthew held it carefully. As he read, his face changed. He stopped several times. At the paragraph about the $27,000 debt, he closed his eyes. At the part about consequences, his eyes filled with tears. When he reached the final lines, he was crying. I didn't interrupt. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully. I wish I'd known this before. Maybe you weren't ready, he nodded. You're probably right. He looked at me. Did Dad know I might turn out like this? No. Then why did he write it? Because he knew you were capable of making mistakes. Matthew smiled sadly. He knew me. He loved you. I know. He placed the letter on the table. Mom, I'm sorry. You've said that. I know. Then what are you sorry for this time? For making you feel like you had to defend your right to your own life. That sentence stayed with me. Because that was exactly what had happened. I had spent weeks defending my savings, my house, my retirement, my independence. But what I had really been defending was the right to live the rest of my life without fear. I took his hand. I forgive you. His eyes filled. But, he laughed through tears. I knew there'd be a but. But forgiveness doesn't mean I forget. I know. It means I don't want the past controlling the future. He nodded. I want that too. We sat quietly. Then Matthew asked, Can I ask you something? Of course. Did you ever seriously consider giving me the $180,000? I thought about it. Yes. His eyes widened. Really, yes. When the week after you called me selfish, he looked ashamed. I almost transferred the money. Why didn't you? Your father. He smiled. The porch conversation and his letter. Matthew lowered his head. I thought saying no meant I was failing you. He looked up. You didn't. No. You were protecting both of us. I smiled. Maybe. He stood. I should go. Stay for lunch. He smiled. I'd like that. We ate sandwiches at the kitchen table. No financial statements. No business projections. No discussions about loans. We talked about the grandchildren, Lauren's garden, a movie we'd all watched, Robert's old jokes, normal things, beautiful things. After lunch, Matthew helped me carry some boxes into the garage. Before he left, he hugged me again. Mom. Yes, thank you for saying no. I smiled. You're welcome. He laughed. I never thought I'd say that. Neither did I. He walked down the driveway. I watched him get into his car. This time I didn't feel fear when he drove away. I felt peace. That evening I sat on the porch with Robert's letter beside me. I thought about everything that had happened. The loan, the accusation, the accountant, the property valuation, the financing proposal, the broken business, the smaller company, the apology, the letter. And I finally understood the real twist hidden inside all of it. The $180,000 I had refused had never been the thing that saved my family. The refusal had, because it forced Matthew to stop running. It forced me to stop rescuing. It forced both of us to separate love from money. And that changed everything. I eventually made one final decision about my estate. I didn't remove Matthew from it. I didn't punish him. I didn't leave everything to someone else. Instead, I created structures that would protect my independence, provide responsibly for my grandchildren, and prevent anyone from treating my inheritance as an asset before I was gone. Matthew didn't argue. He didn't ask for details. He simply said, "Whatever you decide, Mom, it's your life." Those 7 words were the real apology. Because once upon a time, he had looked at my life and thought he was entitled to a piece of it. Now he understood something much more important. I was his mother. I was not his bank. I was not his collateral. I was not his inheritance. I was simply Caroline, a woman who had spent a lifetime building a life with the man she loved, and a mother who finally understood that loving her son didn't mean carrying him. It meant believing he could stand and watching him prove it. What I finally gave my son a year after Matthew first sat at my kitchen table and asked me for $180,000, I realized something had changed. I no longer knew exactly how much money was in his business account. And I didn't need to. That may sound like a small detail. To me, it was a miracle. For years, Matthew's financial life had somehow become emotionally connected to mine. When his business did well, I felt relieved. When he struggled, I worried. When he called, I wondered whether he needed something. When he mentioned a new project, I thought about whether it was profitable. And when he asked me for $180,000, I had almost allowed fear and guilt to convince me that his financial problem was somehow my responsibility. Now I could hear about his business without feeling my stomach tighten. That was how I knew we had both changed. Jenkins Residential Renovations was still operating. It was smaller than the company Matthew had once imagined. Much smaller. There was no expansion office, no fleet of newer trucks, no ambitious plan to become the biggest renovation company in Charlotte. Matthew had 8 employees once. Now he had 4. But those 4 were paid on time. His suppliers trusted him again. His company had a cash reserve. And every project was chosen carefully. Matthew had learned to say no to customers too. That had surprised me. One Sunday, he told me about a homeowner who wanted a massive renovation completed in an impossible amount of time. "Did you take the job?" I asked. "No," I smiled. "Why not?" "Because I knew we'd lose money." I almost laughed. The old Matthew would have taken it. He would have looked at the projected revenue, imagined the future check, and convinced himself the risk was worth it. The new Matthew had looked at the numbers and walked away. "Your father would be proud. I hope so." "He would." Matthew smiled. Our relationship had become easier. Not perfect. Easier. We still had difficult conversations. Sometimes I noticed him hesitate before discussing something financial. Sometimes he would say, "Don't worry, I'm not asking you for anything." And I would tell him, "You don't have to say that." But I understood why he did. He was learning that trust isn't rebuilt by pretending the damage never happened. It's rebuilt by behaving differently over time. Lauren and I had become closer too. One afternoon, she came to my house alone. We sat on the porch with iced tea. "I owe you an apology," she said. "For what?" "For letting Matthew make me believe you were the problem." I looked at her. "You were scared." "I was. You were protecting your family. I was also protecting the lifestyle we had." She looked down. "I didn't realize how much pressure Matthew was under until everything came out." "I don't think he realized it either." She nodded. "I thought if you gave him the money, everything would go back to normal. So did I. Instead, selling the house forced us to simplify." I smiled. "You don't seem unhappy." She laughed. "We have fewer rooms, and I spend more time with the kids. That sounds like an improvement." "It is." She looked at me. "You know what Matthew says now? What he says the best thing you ever did for him was refuse to save him." I looked away because my eyes had suddenly filled with tears. I didn't want Lauren to see, but she did. "I'm glad," she said softly. "So am I." A few weeks later, Matthew invited the whole family to a small barbecue at their rental house. It wasn't fancy. There was a folding table in the backyard, a simple grill, plastic chairs, a cooler filled with drinks. The children ran around with water balloons. At one point, Matthew stood near the grill wearing an old t-shirt and an apron Lauren had bought him as a joke. He looked happy. Not successful. Happy. There was a difference. I watched him laughing with his children and thought about the man who had once been so terrified of failure that he nearly put his mother's home behind his business. I wondered how different our lives might have been if I had written the check. Perhaps he would have repaid me. Perhaps the company would have recovered. Perhaps everything would have worked out. But I knew one thing for certain. I would never know. And I didn't need to. Because the decision I made wasn't about predicting the future. It was about protecting the life I had left, while allowing my son to take responsibility for the life he had chosen. After dinner, Matthew asked me to walk with him. We went toward the far end of the backyard. The children were still laughing behind us. The evening air was warm. Mom. Yes, I've been thinking about something. You always say that before saying something serious. He laughed. Fair. He stopped. I wanted to thank you. You already did. I know. He looked at me. But I want to explain what I mean. I waited. When you refused the $180,000, I thought you were hurting me. I remember. I thought you were choosing money over your son. I remember that too. I was wrong. I smiled. Yes. He laughed. You don't have to agree that quickly. I've been waiting a year. He shook his head. Then his expression became serious. If you'd given me that money, I would have been grateful. I know. I probably would have paid some bills. I know. And I probably would have told myself everything was fixed. I said nothing. But then another problem would have come. He looked toward the house. Maybe I would have come back for more. Maybe. And if things got worse... He stopped. You might have lost your house. I nodded. He swallowed. I don't know how I would have lived with that. Neither do I. He turned toward me. You know what I finally understand? What you didn't refuse to help me. I raised an eyebrow. That sounds suspicious. He smiled. You refused to help me in the way I wanted. That is more accurate. And because of that, you gave me something better. What a chance to find out whether I could actually fix my own life. I felt tears in my eyes. Matthew continued. You didn't give me money. No. You gave me consequences. Yes. You gave me honesty. Yes. And you gave me enough space to become responsible. I looked at my son. What did I finally give you? He smiled. A future that belongs to me. I couldn't speak. He reached for my hand. You didn't give me an inheritance early. No. You didn't give me your house. No. You didn't rescue my company. No. He squeezed my fingers. You gave me the chance to stop being afraid of failing. That was the moment I understood what the entire year had been about. I had thought I was protecting my money. I had thought I was protecting my house. I had thought I was protecting my retirement. But perhaps I had been protecting something even more valuable. The relationship between a mother and her adult son. Money had been sitting between us like a wall. When I refused to hand it over, the wall became visible. And once we could see it, we could finally remove it. Later that evening, after everyone left, I sat alone in my living room. Robert's photograph was on the mantel. I looked at him. You were right, I whispered. I thought about his old warning. Don't put your retirement into his business. For years I had assumed that was simply financial advice. Now I understood it was something deeper. He had wanted me to remember that Matthew's life belonged to Matthew, and mine belonged to me. The next morning I met Rebecca to finalize the last changes to my estate plan. I did not remove Matthew. I did not punish him. I did not leave my assets to charity simply to make a point. Instead, I created a structure that preserved my independence during my lifetime and provided responsibly for my grandchildren. Matthew would receive whatever I chose to leave him when the time came. But he would never again have to wonder whether my love depended on what I left behind. And I would never again feel guilty for using my own money to protect myself. When I told Matthew about the changes, he didn't ask how much he would receive. He didn't ask what accounts I had. He didn't ask what the house was worth. He simply nodded. That's your decision, Mom. I smiled. Yes, it is. Then he hugged me. And somehow that simple sentence meant more than any promise about inheritance ever could. A few months later, Matthew's company had its best quarter since the crisis. Not its biggest. Its best. There was a difference. He had enough cash in reserve. Every employee was paid. Suppliers were current. And Matthew had finally stopped measuring success by how much he could build. He measured it by how much he could sustain. One evening he called me. "Mom, yes. I just wanted to tell you something. What, I have the money." I laughed. What money? The reserve. How much? He told me. I smiled. That sounds wonderful. I wanted you to know because a year ago I thought having money meant spending it. And now I think having money means not needing to spend it. I laughed. Your father would be very proud. There was a pause. I think he would. Then Matthew said something I'll remember for the rest of my life. "Mom, thank you for being selfish." I laughed. You'd better explain that one. I mean, thank you for being selfish enough to protect yourself. I looked at Robert's photograph. Maybe my son finally understood. There was nothing selfish about refusing to destroy your future to rescue someone else's present. There was nothing cruel about allowing an adult child to face consequences. There was nothing wrong with loving someone enough to say no. And sometimes the most generous thing a mother can give her child isn't money. It is the freedom to become responsible for his own life. I never gave Matthew the $180,000. I never signed over my house. I never emptied my retirement. And I never stopped loving my son. What I finally gave him was something money could never buy. The chance to stand on his own. And what he finally gave me was something I hadn't realized I had been waiting for since Robert died. Peace. The greatest lesson I learned from everything that happened with Matthew is that love and rescue are not the same thing. For years I believed being a good mother meant being there whenever my son needed me. If he was struggling, I wanted to help. If he was afraid, I wanted to make the fear disappear. But when Matthew asked me for $180,000, I finally had to ask myself a painful question. Was I helping my son, or was I protecting him from consequences he needed to face? Sometimes saying no is not an act of rejection. Sometimes it is an act of love. We can love our children deeply without giving them everything they ask for. We can support them without sacrificing our own security. We can offer advice, encouragement, meals time, and a shoulder to lean on without handing over our entire future. I also learned that protecting your financial independence is not selfish. The money Robert and I saved represented decades of work, sacrifice, patience, and planning. It was not money I owed anyone simply because they were family. My home was not collateral simply because my son believed I would eventually say yes. But perhaps the most important lesson was this: we cannot grow for someone else. Matthew had to learn that failure did not make him worthless. He had to face his debts, shrink his company, admit his mistakes, and rebuild his reputation. And I had to learn that I could stand beside him without carrying him. In the end, refusing the loan did not destroy our relationship. It gave us the chance to rebuild it honestly. If you are a parent, perhaps you faced a moment when saying no made you feel guilty. Maybe you wondered whether setting a boundary meant you weren't loving enough. I hope this story reminds you that sometimes the healthiest boundary is also the most loving gift you can give. So I'd truly love to hear from you. Would you have given Matthew the $180,000? Do you believe Caroline made the right decision by protecting her home and retirement? And have you ever had to choose between helping someone you love and protecting yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story